2023 is over, so you might be wondering where my yearly countdowns went. As a matter of fact, they went into this single, ginormous video. That's right, I'm not segmenting them into 3 separate countdown videos of video games, TV shows, and movies. I'm combining them into my top 15 media texts of 2022. Just so we're on the same page, a media text is any work of art that pertains to a medium, like video games, TV shows, or movies. Books and music also qualify, but I'm not including anything from those media in this countdown. I actually dabbled with this idea of combining 2022 media back in 2021, because there were so many highly anticipated media texts set to release during 2022, but it did become less tempting as anticipated stuff like The Legend of Zelda and Test Drive Unlimited didn't come out that year. I pretty much gave up on the idea when Across the Spider-Verse got delayed, since I thought that would be the only movie to make the list, and it felt pointless to make such a list if it didn't include a single movie. I thus started writing separate media countdown scripts instead, and got relatively far on the TV show script. I had little motivation to write the movie script, however, as I wasn't interested enough to refresh my memory on most of them. I did quite enjoy most of the ones I had seen up until that point, but it wasn't until later that I found movies I actually loved. This compelled me to revisit my idea of combining the countdowns, but I did hesitate to go through with it, since I had already written the lowest ranking entries on my TV show script, and I knew for a fact they wouldn't qualify for this list, meaning I would have to scrap them. Eventually though, I figured that combining the countdowns was a better idea, because that meant a smaller workload and a better way to cover my favorite games of 2022, because there were only 3 I truly cared about, so making a small separate list about those would feel pointless. This list will still feel unusual though. Because I had already written much of the TV show script, my usual format of discussing the season, my favorite character, and my favorite episode still stands, and my usual way of discussing movies and games remains the same too, so there'll be different approaches to each medium. That goes for the editing as well. I'll just use a few images for TV shows and movies, and put more effort into editing game footage together. A tradition that will permeate not just games this time, but TV shows and movies as well, is that I can include media texts outside of 2022 that I first experienced during that year. So essentially, this video is all over the place, especially since number 1 will be a separate video releasing later. You'll know why when I get there. I do think this is the right call, however, as I'll get to discuss my absolute favorite media texts of the year, so I'll definitely be invested in each entry. This also decreases my workload a bit, though as you can see, this video is still longer than it has any right to be. So yeah, enough yapping, let's get to ranking my 15 favorite media texts of 2022 already. Number 15. Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. I saw both Puss in Boots movies not that long ago, and while the first one was good, the sequel was great. What's immediately noticeable jumping between the two is that The Last Wish has a brand new art style, which might actually be the movie's biggest selling point. It seems to have been inspired by Into the Spider-Verse, which is an example of that spectacular movie's positive influence on the animated medium. The Last Wish doesn't look as good as Spider-Verse, but to be fair, that's an unrealistic expectation, and The Last Wish looks beautiful regardless. There's so much creative use of color, and the fight scenes are directed so well with fluid animation. Perhaps my favorite thing about this movie is its brilliant premise. Puss literally dies near the beginning, but since cats have 9 lives, he survives. However, it turns out he's already died 8 times, so he's on his last life, meaning he can't live recklessly anymore, unless he finds the mythical last wish to restore his lives. The montage where we see his 8 deaths might be my favorite scene. It's just so funny, and established the movie's surprisingly dark tone. It seems happy-go-lucky at first, Puss singing his main theme, Fearless Hero, but that persona gets deconstructed pretty quickly. When he's on his last life, he's hunted by a big wolf who successfully terrifies Puss. The wolf's whistling alone is enough to trigger Puss into panic attacks that are portrayed quite authentically, with rapid breaths and pulse. It's later revealed that the wolf is Death, straight up, the Grim Reaper himself, which is oh so fitting for the story. Death is portrayed so scarily, his whistling changing the tone of a scene on a dime, making him an effective antagonist. The other antagonists are solid as well, Jack Horner being comedic in how absolutely messed up he is. And it's even funnier to see the Jiminy Cricket-inspired Ethical Bug's reaction to him. who's unlucky to be paired with someone so incapable of doing morally good deeds. Puss in Boots and the Shrek universe in general is so good at incorporating fairy tales into their stories, and The Last Wish is no exception. The way it handles Goldilocks and the three bears is so good, Goldilocks wanting a true family, but eventually realizing that the three bears are her true family. The ending is so clever, as the characters' wishes are fulfilled without even using the power of the last wish. That is, except Jack Horner, who bit the dust because he couldn't appreciate what he already had. For Puss, that was his relationship with Kitty Softpaws, and vice versa, as Kitty wanted someone she could trust, and Puss earned her trust in the end. Kitty was actually a character established in the first movie, and I must admit that I much preferred her voice there. That doesn't negate how well she's written into the sequel, however, and I'm glad she showed up again. The dog Perito, on the other hand, is a new main character, and he's a wholesome presence amidst all the heavy subject matter. That said, even he contributes to the black comedy, swearing like a sailor and talking cheerily about the fact that his family tried to drown him in a sock with a rock. His blind optimism is fortunately more endearing than it is cringeworthy. Puss in Boots: The Last Wish was such a pleasant surprise that's high on the list of my favorite 2022 movies, but it's at the bottom of this multimodal list. That just goes to show that this list is riddled with quality, at least to me. Number 14, Stranger Things Season 4. I've fallen a bit out of love with Stranger Things over the years, as every subsequent season hasn't been able to live up to the first, and I think that applies to Season 4 as well. That said, Seasons 2 and 3 were still really good, and Season 4 is probably better. Its production value certainly is the highest out of any Stranger Things season, and it's used to great effect, with high caliber visuals that enhance the scale. The music enhances the epicness even further, especially the song that mixes Running Up That Hill with the Stranger Things theme. That got me super pumped up in the season finale. So did Eddie's performance of Metallica's Master of Puppets, and I love the season premiere's use of Kiss's Detroit Rock City while cross-cutting between a game of basketball and Dungeons & Dragons. I really enjoyed the first episode, as it did well in getting me back into the show and introducing plot threads and characters for the rest of the season. It did take a few episodes to reach other really good ones though. I would say that the episodes in between 1, 4, and 7 weren't that engaging. Perhaps my biggest gripe with every season after the first is that the writing hasn't been nearly as tight. Every detail mattered in Season 1, whereas Seasons 2 to 4 have some unnecessary filler, and characters who don't contribute much to the overall narrative. An example of this in Season 4 is the subplot surrounding Mike, Will, Jonathan, and Argyle, which mainly consists of driving between places. Mike used to be such an integral main character, and now he feels more like an afterthought. Will also continues to feel like wasted potential, but at least he got a couple of nice subtextual scenes related to his crush on Mike. The Russian subplot was probably even more inconsequential, but I did enjoy it more. Hopper seemed like an actual maniac in Season 3, but he felt more like his old self in Season 4, still being a bit brash, but more level-headed, making smart plays and delivering some good monologues. The scene where he talks about his involvement in the Vietnam War and how that affected his daughter who died of cancer felt very real and touching. I also think Dustin went back to his old smarter self, instead of being reduced to simple comic relief. Season 4 does still have a similar comedic style to Seasons 2 and 3 that sometimes feel out of place, along with other flaws that undercut the quality. The season finale is a good example of this. It's bound to be, as it's nearly 2.5 hours long, probably the longest television episode I've seen. The climax is really exciting, but it feels like Vecna gets defeated too easily, and by the power of love of all things. Eddie and Max dying in the arms of Dustin and Lucas respectively is an absolutely heartbreaking scene that makes me tear up, but it's another example of the Duffer Brothers' repetitive way of handling character deaths. They always kill a character that got introduced within the season, like Bob in Season 2, Alexei in Season 3, and now Eddie in Season 4. Furthermore, they don't commit to killing OG characters by bringing them back. First 11, then Hopper and Martin Brenner, and now, probably Max. I've seen people defend 11 potentially reviving Max because killing Max after overcoming a trauma would send a mixed message, but bro, she experienced ridiculous pain and became a blind cripple. I doubt that's any better. Something that satisfied me completely was the Upside Down finally overlapping with Hawkins, which I've been waiting for since the end of Season 2. It was a haunting spectacle that should lead to an exciting final season. Other stuff I loved was Eddie going from a coward to a brave hero, Eleven regaining her powers in a messed up trip down memory lane with Papa, Max outrunning Vecna up that hill after contemplating suicide, and Vecna's whole ordeal. In the end, Season 4 is really good, probably the best Stranger Things season since the first, but it does have a number of things that irk me, and I hope that Season 5 will keep such annoyances to a minimum. It wasn't easy figuring out my favorite character. Hopper was good again, Eleven had plenty of interesting stuff, Max was at her peak, and Eddie had a really good arc, but Vecna left the biggest impression on me. Vecna is such a good villain that benefits the show in multiple ways. For one, Stranger Things is of the horror genre, but I haven't found the show all that scary, until Season 4, where Vecna not only brings terrifying physical horror, killing people in gruesome ways, but also even scarier psychological horror, forcing people to relive their guilt in nightmares that signal their impending doom. Secondly, I feel like the show needed a human villain that isn't Martin Brenner, and I find Vecna more compelling. Third, he recontextualizes the show in so many eye-opening ways. It's revealed that his actual name is Henry Creel, being the son of the Creel family who were Vecna's first victims. Another big reveal is that he became Martin Brenner's first test subject at Hawkins' lab, being referred to as One. We were led to believe that 11 killed all the other test subjects at the lab, but that was One's doing. 11 turned him into Vecna after creating the first gate to the Upside Down and throwing him in there, and he soon shaped its mist into the Mind Flayer so that he could control the vines and demogorgons as a hive mind. Vecna/Henry/One really is the gift that keeps on giving. I do feel that he got downplayed at the end, losing easier than he should have, but at least he got the Upside Down to overlap with Hawkins, and he'll probably inflict even more damage in the final season. I'm glad to have him as the main threat. My favorite episode was undoubtedly Season 4, Episode 7, The Massacre at Hawkins' Lab. This is one of the longest episodes of television I've seen, a feature length clocking in at 1 hour and 40 minutes, and pretty much every scene in it was interesting or exciting. Steve nearly dies at the start of it, but I'm glad he didn't, because he's been the consistently best character across the seasons. Watching him and the other young adults rip bats apart was so metal. Nancy was smart for going to her house in the Upside Down to find her guns, and it was interesting to find out that they're not there, because the Upside Down is stuck in 1983 when the first gate opened. Dustin was also being smart, figuring out that Vecna is opening multiple gates, and finding a good way for the young adults to communicate with them from the Upside Down using a drawing machine. I love seeing the kids biking again, and the transition from that to the young adults biking in the Upside Down was awesome. It was super scary when Nancy fell into the pool where Barb died, displaying that she's still haunted by guilt, and thus also haunted by Vecna, a good way to exacerbate the tension. The stakes were already high with Hopper and Enzo fighting a horrifying Demogorgon, who ripped people to shreds with ease. The reunion between Joyce and Hopper felt super satisfying after all that. The best part of the episode, however, is everything involving Vecna/Henry/One, bringing about so many crazy reveals. I doubt an episode of Stranger Things will ever top Season 1's finale, The Upside Down, but out of every episode that's been released so far, The Massacre at Hawkins' Lab comes the closest. Number 13, Chainsaw Man Season 1. Chainsaw Man was the most anticipated anime of 2022, and while it may have been a bit overhyped, I enjoyed it quite a lot. It's comparable to Jujutsu Kaisen in several aspects, which was actually the only non-2022 show I saw last year, so I guess it's worth shouting out. Both are animated by Studio Mappa, both have high production values, and both involve some type of monsters that are powered by fear. The difference is that while I didn't care much for the characters or tone of Jujutsu Kaisen throughout its 24-episode first season, Chainsaw Man made me care right from the get-go with its strong pilot, and kept me invested throughout its 12-episode first season. It sets up Denji as a character you can either empathize or sympathize with. I may not be dirt poor like he is, but I can relate to some of his desires, feel bad about his situation, and thus root for him. It helps that he's formed a bond with Pochita, an adorable little dog devil. Going into the show, I thought the main character already was Chainsaw Man, but Denji becoming Chainsaw Man by fusing with his chainsaw dog made it so much more interesting and emotional. The funny and also sad thing is that Denji is even more of a dog than Pochita is, following everyone's commands as long as he's paid. That leads to some pretty toxic relationships, with Makima in particular, who uses Denji's adoration for her to manipulate him to her will. Other characters are eventually introduced who I also care about, like the stoic but caring Aki, the crazy but funny Power, the irresponsible but charming Himeno, and the cowardly but badass Kobeni. We get in-depth backstory on some of these characters, and they all hit, particularly Aki's, who's on a vengeful quest against the Gun Devil responsible for killing his family. Regarding the Gun Devil, I'm glad it's a plotline spanning multiple seasons, instead of getting resolved in a few episodes. It gives the plot some direction, and I'm eager to see what comes of it. I bet it's going to be crazy, based on the sheer insanity of episode 8, which was quite the turning point. It seemed like most of the big characters died, and while only one did, it was so impactful. It's impressive that Himeno only needed a few episodes of build-up to sell that moment. It helped that she had such a strong relationship with Aki, who got to cry for her like she wanted. My investment in these characters made me invested in the fights, especially given that the show proved to have stakes, that characters could actually die. The way devils are incorporated into the character's abilities is really cool too, Aki reducing his lifespan by using a sword tied to the cursed devil, and Himeno sacrificing her entire body to boost the ghost devil. I have no idea which devil Makima has a contract with, but her Death Note squishing ability is terrifying. This anime is directed so well, with absolutely stunning cinematography in almost every episode, and terrific animation both in bombastic fights and subtle character movements. The fantastic visuals carry over to the opening and various endings, which are all impressive, especially considering every episode has a different ending. Most of them have really good songs too, especially ending 3, 5, 9, and 12. The most controversial aspect of Chainsaw Man has been the use of CGI, and while it can be noticeable, I didn't think it took away from anything. When you consider how impressive the anime is as a whole, the criticisms about the show looking ugly are definitely overblown and laughable. What's funnier, however, is the show's comedy, which largely stems from Denji's sheer will to accomplish mundane tasks like copying a feel. Him kicking Aki's nuts and blaming it on the Nut Devil was probably the funniest moment of the season, and I love how Denji and Aki later kicked the Katana Man's nuts as a requiem for Himeno. While the Japanese voice cast is fantastic, the English dub sometimes increases the hilarity, especially in power scenes, whose voice to perfection. I've given the show a lot of praise, but a reason it's not higher is that it does have some downtime between a few fantastic episodes, and while it has completed an arc, it feels like the show is only just beginning. I was a bit put off by the amount of character introductions in the penultimate episode, and the season finale was cool, but I was craving for more. The wait for season 2 will be rough, but it'll be worth it if its production is as strong as season 1 is. Although Chainsaw Man featured several good characters, Denji remained my favorite by a wide margin. He's a more relatable and sympathetic character than most anime protagonists, who tend to strive for big goals that we can't realistically achieve. But Denji just wants to live normally, seeking such trivial things like girls and bread with jam. I connected with him immediately and rooted for his dreams to come true, especially since he's partly doing it for Pochita, who sacrificed himself to save Denji's life. Denji had to sell his own body parts to make a decent living, and he otherwise goes through so much shit that I can't help but feel sorry for him. When he finally gets a good living, he still seeks trivial things like copying a feel and coupling a female, and it's very understandable considering he's a hormonal teenager and the fact that he's lacked affection his whole life, aside from Pochita, who was his one and only friend. Denji's sheer willpower to achieve these things makes him so much fun to watch. He's a very funny guy in general, speaking in a dorky way, cracking hilarious jokes, and sometimes letting his lust get the better of him. He's always completely honest, straight up telling anyone, including Makima, how much he wants to bang her. I love how after Power tells Denji about her motivation to get her cat back, Denji responds that's dumb as hell, and switches to completely caring about rescuing her cat when she offers him to grope her as a reward. He's so damn funny just being himself, and even though he's explicitly horny, he never goes overboard with it and respects consent. He sadly gets used a lot, has to endure loads of pain as Chainsaw Man, and his achievements are often disappointing. He was so eager to fondle boobs, but when he did, it wasn't nearly as exciting as he thought it would be, and his first kiss got ruined because Himeno was so drunk that she puked right into his mouth. I have a feeling that more of his first times will be ruined too, considering how messed up Makima appears to be. Either way, I'm rooting for my dog to live his life to the fullest. While Season 1, Episode 8, Gunfire might have been the best episode, Season 1, Episode 1, Dog and Chainsaw remained my favorite. The first episode of a show is supposed to hook you, and like I said, Chainsaw Man had me immediately invested in Denji and his bond with Pochita. I was also stunned by the amazing art, coupled with a moving soundtrack. This episode is directed so well, which is part of why it made me feel the feels. As for the animation, there's definitely noticeable CGI by the end, but it doesn't look bad, and the 2D stuff looks superb. Considering how much shit Denji goes through, even in just this one episode, him becoming Chainsaw Man and slicing all the zombies felt so cathartic. It was literally executed so well. Denji pulling his cord as zombies bury him, then you gradually hear a chainsaw noise get louder, until Chainsaw Man erupts from the zombies in a pool of blood. That was so metal, dude. From the outside looking in, this fight looks like a filler fight I wouldn't care about, despite the impressive animation, but I somehow care a lot. This pilot might be controversial for its CG use, but as far as I'm concerned, it's one of the best pilot episodes I've seen. Number 12. God of War Ragnarok. God of War was one of the biggest games of 2018, so it came as no surprise that its sequel, God of War Ragnarok, became one of the biggest games of 2022. Even though I really like both games and think they're of high quality, I don't regard them as highly as most seem to, which is why Ragnarok isn't higher on my list. The aspect of God of War 2018 that got the highest praise was its storytelling, but I was honestly more impressed by the graphics. Before it, I thought Uncharted 4 was the best looking game on PS4, but that's a relatively linear game, whereas God of War is a bigger semi-open world game, so to achieve such high graphical fidelity at such a large scale was very impressive. Horizon Zero Dawn looks great for an even bigger open world, but most of the character animations in that game look wonky, whereas the character animations in God of War always look fantastic. It's no surprise then that Ragnarok also looks consistently amazing, but it admittedly doesn't seem like much of a graphical step up compared to its predecessor. It surprisingly doesn't look as good as Horizon Forbidden West, which is a much bigger PS4/PS5 hybrid game released within the same year. In any case, Ragnarok looks good enough, especially with the imaginative visuals across the varied environments. I like that some of the realms we visited in the predecessor look different due to the effects of Fimbulwinter. It's a neat touch that keeps those areas fresh. Some of the music is also different, with compositions reminiscent of Black Sails, which makes sense, as Bear McCreary also composed the soundtrack for that show. I like how Bear McCreary is a dwarf inside the game who plays the hurdy-gurdy. That's such a funny name for a musical instrument, by the way. The soundtrack is pretty good overall, but a lot of it blends together, so it's not one of my favorites. It's a shame that my favorite song only plays during the credits. I had heard a performance of Blood Upon the Snow at the 2022 Game Awards, long before I had finished the game, so I was waiting for it to appear at some point during the campaign. It made sense to play it in the credits after Brock's funeral, but I wish it had been used during a big emotional cutscene to make it hit harder. There were plenty of moving scenes throughout the game, but I wasn't moved as much as I expected to be, so perhaps some more emotional music would have done the trick. Maybe I just wasn't the most invested, which might be due to the fact that I spent over a year finishing the game, waiting so long between story beats that I became disconnected. The writing was still great, managing to juggle plenty of characters and plot threads into a cohesive whole for the most part, even though it might not be as cohesive as its predecessor's more limited plot. Like I said, the main reason God of War 2018 was praised was due to its storytelling, and it was definitely great. It was a bold move to take such an irredeemable monster like Kratos in a direction of betterment, learning to become a father for his boy. Kratos' development is amazing and continues to be in Ragnarok, where he is very wise, yet still has much to learn. Atreus obviously has much to learn as well and makes some foolhardy decisions, but he grows a lot too. It's bittersweet seeing Atreus leave Kratos to go on his own adventures, which I hope is elaborated on in a later game or DLC. To be honest, the plot of Ragnarok might have been at its most interesting while Kratos and Atreus were separated, and I don't think the main story hooked me until Atreus went on his own to Asgard. I will admit that the beginning with Thor and Odin was awesome. I especially loved the moment where Thor killed Kratos, only for him to revive him with lightning. The plot meandered a lot after that in Svartalfheim, however, Atreus constantly saying they need to find Tyr, Kratos constantly saying they don't need to find Tyr, and Kratos allowing the search to happen anyway despite his numerous protests. It was questionable, bland, and repetitive. I was honestly more captivated by the storytelling and side missions for a while, like when you unshackle the huge sea beast that Mimir wrongfully imprisoned long ago, and Freya confronting her past. Those missions contributed some nuanced character writing, which this game excels at. I guess that's why the Asgard stuff was so interesting, because it largely focused on the complex family dynamic between Odin, Thor, Thrud, and Sif. That said, the payoffs to this dynamic did feel a little rushed by the end, and I wish Sif in particular had gotten more screen time to sell her shift in allegiance. The assault on Asgard in general felt too brief considering how much the game had built up beforehand. This might be because Santa Monica decided to make a duology for the Norse saga instead of a trilogy, but I thought the game was decently paced for the most part. I just wished they'd cut the meandering near the beginning and provided some more substance near the end. I found most other big moments fairly fleshed out, like everything surrounding Brock. Sindri had apparently brought him back from the dead, without Brock knowing, but he later finds out and forgives Sindri for it as he dies again, this time permanently. I had it spoiled to me that Brock would die, and since Tyr was acting suspicious while Brock was chewing him out, I saw it coming that Tyr would kill him in that moment. I did not expect Tyr to be Odin in disguise, however, which was a well done twist. It is kind of a shame that actual Tyr wasn't prevalent in the game, and I was shocked to happen upon him in the first optional post-campaign mission I did. My biggest criticism of God of War 2018 was that the combat took a while to get enjoyable. You could only use the Leviathan axe to begin with, and it felt very limiting and repetitive to use. It became gradually better as you unlocked skills for it, but I didn't like the combat much until the Blades of Chaos came into play. The blades were so much more fun to use than the axe, and the ability to switch between them kept the combat dynamic and fun. In Ragnarok, you thankfully have both from the start, and the Leviathan axe might actually be on par with the Blades of Chaos this time, which is awesome, as that means there are two equally fun weapons to switch between. The combat becomes better yet when Kratos receives the Draupnir spear, adding another layer to the action. Throwing and recalling the Leviathan axe is cool, but at some point you wish it would just return to you instantly, which is a problem the Draupnir spear alleviates, as a new spear respawns in Kratos' hand after you throw one. It can be thrown more precisely too, which is very convenient for hitting enemies more accurately, not to mention the Eyes of Odin birds. The Draupnir spear took a bit getting used to, but it's just as great as the other weapons and is such a welcome addition. Whereas the combat was my biggest issue with God of War 2018, it might actually be Ragnarok's biggest strength. The only problem I have with it is that switching between the weapons can be finicky and unresponsive, which sucks when fights can be so intense and fast-paced. At least switching between playable characters is smooth, and that's the exact word I'd use to describe Atreus with. Atreus doesn't have as many combat options as Kratos has, as he's used far less. But he's still got a varied moveset, with several melee attacks and ranged ones. I was hoping he would be playable in Ragnarok, and I'm very satisfied with the result. It's awesome that both Kratos and Atreus have different companions. Kratos obviously has Atreus, but he also has Freya and Brock, while Atreus has Sindri, Angerboda, Thrud, a floating sword named Ingrid, and even Thor. It's so cool that you get to team up with Thor, even though he hates Atreus' guts and often contemplates killing him. There may not be much difference between the companions' abilities, but I appreciate the variety, and that it adds to the character dynamics. Even though I love the combat, there's something about Ragnarok's gameplay that made me take over a year to actually finish it. Sure, it's a long game that took me 50 hours to beat, but I've burned through 50 hours in other long games far quicker, like Horizon Forbidden West and The Legend of Zelda Tears of the Kingdom, which I can play for several hours without getting bored. Ragnarok, meanwhile, I could only play for a few hours a day. Perhaps it's because Ragnarok feels linear despite being a semi-open world, often being limited in where you can go and how to do things. I found the maps of several places oftentimes confusing, especially in Vanaheim, which led to a ton of monotonous backtracking with a restrictive traversal. Some of the puzzles are also quite annoying, especially those that require hitting runic marks at perfect spots to unlock chests. It doesn't help that characters often tell you how to solve a puzzle before you've even had the time to think. That's such a bad habit PlayStation games need to stop doing already. At least have such hints be optional. While I like that this game has a lot of content, it can feel like too much at times, and I'm not sure if I want to go back to it anytime soon, even despite the newly released DLC. I wouldn't call God of War Ragnarok a masterpiece or a perfect sequel to God of War 2018, but it's an amazing game that improves quite a bit on its predecessor in the most necessary area. Also, I really enjoy bothering Ratatoskr.
I see. You're deliberately attempting to push me into some sort of emotional outburst, aren't you? Well, I'm not so easily swayed, my good man. Stop! Stupid time! Oh dear. I'm sorry. I don't know where that came from.
Number 11. House of the Dragon Season 1. After the final season of Game of Thrones disappointed just about everyone, many lost complete interest in the series. I myself still adore the first half and certain episodes from the last half. I'm still very much into the world of A Song of Ice and Fire, so I was very excited for House of the Dragon, and considering D&D wouldn't be involved in it, I had faith that it could be really good. Lo and behold, it was, and it managed to reel people back in despite being turned off by Game of Thrones. House of the Dragon opened with a strong premiere and stayed strong throughout the whole season, definitely not on par with the first half of Game of Thrones, but better than that show's second half. House of the Dragon seamlessly reintroduces the world of Westeros, bringing back iconic locations in a new light, centuries before Game of Thrones takes place, so the Dragon Pit and Harrenhal haven't been destroyed yet. Neither has the Targaryen dynasty, which is at an all-time high during this time period, ruling Westeros and several dragons capable of cataclysm. There weren't many Targaryens in Game of Thrones, so it's interesting to see how a Targaryen society operates, which disturbingly includes a lot of incest. This prequel also brings back the complex political intrigue that Game of Thrones lost along the way, which used to be one of its biggest strengths, so it's nice to see some clever scheming again. The competent writing carries over to the characters, fleshing them out every episode to make them morally grey. At the start of the show, Rhaenyra Targaryen and Alicent Hightower are the best of friends, but they become increasingly divided as Rhaenyra's father marries Alicent and other shenanigans ensue. Eventually, a line is drawn between two factions, the Blacks, with Rhaenyra at the helm, and the Greens, with Alicent at the helm. They're still part of the same family, with Targaryens and dragons on both sides, but they're on the brink of war by the end of the season. Even so, Rhaenyra and Alicent are hesitant to fight each other, even after so much betrayal, which goes to show how complex their relationship is. King Viserys and his brother Daemon also have a complicated relationship, as they constantly fluctuate between being brothers and enemies, often due to misunderstandings. Daemon doesn't even try to clear up these misunderstandings, which is one of many layers to his nuanced character. I haven't read Fire and Blood, which House of the Dragon adapts, but it's apparently supposed to be a vague telling of events by biased sources, so it makes sense for the show to change some things. I hear that many of the changes enrich the events and characters, for instance Aemon accidentally killing Lucerys instead of that being his intent, so that's great. I'm glad the show simultaneously doesn't stray too far from the source. Take the use of dragons, for example. The showrunners could have decided that the dragons should run the show, thinking that's what people tune in for, but I'm impressed by their restraint. While there were dragons in just about every episode, they rarely did any fighting, and that's by design, as they're A Song of Ice and Fire's equivalent of nukes and are thus not to be taken lightly. In a world on the brink of war, it's important to be in control of the dragons, though, as Viserys points out, dragons can't be controlled, which pays off at the very end of the season, Vhagar killing Lucerys against Aemon's wishes. Although I find House of the Dragon great, it doesn't quite reach amazing status, at least not yet. While the visuals are often fantastic, as is expected of such an expensive show, it also has instances of not looking that good, like the day for night shots in episode 7, which, judging by the shadows, was obviously shot during the day. And some other scenes look a bit artificial too, due to the use of volume technology. That paired with the sometimes dull color grade makes the show not as pleasant as it could look, and I think Game of Thrones looks considerably better from the 3rd season onwards. There are also some writing decisions I don't quite vibe with, like Daemon's plot armor in episode 3, Rhaenys' questionable declaration of war in episode 9, and the heavy-handed Song of Ice and Fire referencing, which relates to some of the worst payoff in Game of Thrones. My final criticism is that the season continually builds up, but doesn't quite reach a climax. The season finale was great, but man was I left blue-balled. The cliffhanger should lead to a thrilling dance of dragons in the 2nd season, however, which I'm so stoked for. In terms of characters, Rhaenyra Targaryen was a solid protagonist, Daemon Targaryen was a complex wildcard, and Viserys Targaryen was my favorite. This person feels so human, making countless mistakes by doing what he judges to be right. He never wanted to be the king, and is too naive to be an effective one in such a messed up world, where there are so many corrupt people striving for power, including his advisors. He has to make some difficult decisions, like sacrificing his wife to potentially save his son, who doesn't even survive. That son would have been the heir to the Iron Throne, but he chooses his daughter Rhaenyra instead, which is a very controversial move, considering no woman has ever ruled Westeros, and Viserys later gets a son, who people expect to take over. It's a decision that eventually leads to insurrection and war. His decision to marry Alicent Hightower instead of Laena Velaryon was also considered the wrong move, but the man was simply following his heart. He's further characterized by his interest in prophecies, history, and model making, which he'd rather do than rule Westeros. You can't exactly blame him when his own throne backstabs him, making his health worse every episode. Starting with episode 3, it seemed like he could die at any moment, and when he dropped to the floor in episode 5, I was sure that was it for him. You should have seen my face when he showed up in episode 6, 10 years later by the way. Sure, he looked rough, but he could still walk. When I found out episode 8 was set 6 years after that, I thought Viserys was surely dead by that point. When I saw him still breathing, I both laughed and cheered, and wasn't completely convinced that he died at the end of the episode. He sadly did though, and it had to happen, but it was nonetheless sad to lose the best character. Perhaps the best scene of the season is of dying Viserys slowly but surely walking towards the Iron Throne to help his daughter preserve her position, so that her son could become the Lord of Driftmark. Such a powerful move by a decrepit man who's constantly in pain. It was so wholesome to see him smile during his last supper, and heartbreaking to see that smile be drowned out by more pain. Paddy Considine truly showed his acting chops with this character. Even George R.R. Martin thinks he deserves an Emmy, and finds Viserys better in the show than in the book he wrote. It's a shame that Paddy didn't even get nominated for an Emmy, but that doesn't diminish his talent, nor Viserys' amazing characterization. I think my favorite episode was Season 1, Episode 8, The Lord of the Tides, but I already talked quite a bit about it, and loved Season 1, Episode 3, Second of His Name about as much, so I'll discuss that one. This is such a good character study for my 3 favorite characters, Rhaenyra, Viserys, and Daemon Targaryen. It's been 3 years since Viserys chose Alicent as his wife, but Rhaenyra is still not over that fact, so there's still a rift in Rhaenyra and Alicent's friendship, especially as Alicent and Viserys have produced a son who Rhaenyra thinks her father intends to replace her with as heir. Viserys assures her that's not the case in a really sweet moment of bonding, but Rhaenyra is still upset with the fact that she's being forced to marry. Viserys is struggling with his daughter issues, and remains tired of his kingly duties. He drinks plenty of wine this episode to cope, and becomes more feisty than usual, which is kinda fun to see. There's a terrific scene where Viserys spills out his regrets to Alicent in front of a large bonfire. His actor really killed that scene. Daemon tries to prove himself by winning a battle in the Stepstones, so when Viserys sends aid, he completely rejects it, punching the messenger to death and staking his own life on the suicide mission. He knew he could die, which he nearly did, so you have to admire his unbending conviction. These 3 characters are fleshed out so well in this episode, featuring some of their defining moments, especially in Daemon's case. The episode opened with him in an awesome nighttime scene on his dragon Caraxes, who stomped on a guy who was happy to see him, funnily enough. The battle at the end is critiqued for being unrealistic, and while Daemon definitely has a lot of plot armor here, his survival isn't completely unwarranted. He ran as fast as he could while killing enemies on the way to the crab feeder, and occasionally stopped to take cover from the arrows being fired towards him. He eventually gets hit too, and is only saved because the Valerian army joins in, along with Laenor's dragon Seasmoke. While not among the greatest battles in the Game of Thrones universe, it was an awesome taste of what's to come in the Dance of Dragons. The beginning of the fight where Daemon feigns giving up is beautifully directed with some powerful music, and the ending where he drags a decapitated crab feeder out of the cave and stands tall is badass. The Second Son was definitely a slow episode, which goes for all House of the Dragon episodes, but it featured so much delicious character writing to digest, and had some great action on top of that. Number 10. Andor Season 1. A total of 4 Star Wars shows aired over the course of 2022, with varying quality. The Book of Boba Fett was rather mediocre, and eventually relied on The Mandalorian because they couldn't figure out how to make a show solely about Boba Fett compelling. Obi-Wan Kenobi is one of the worst shows I've seen, putting writers with minimal Star Wars knowledge at the helm, thus breaking the lore and dumbing down some beloved characters. Tales of the Jedi was actually quite good, but should have focused more on the enigma that is Count Dooku, as we're already so familiar with Ahsoka, who got her own show anyway. And then there's Andor, which made the list. I'll admit, the first time I saw this show, I wasn't paying much attention, so I wasn't enjoying it much aside from the epic climaxes. I decided to rewatch it early this year, paying close attention this time, and I realized that it's so much better than I initially gave it credit for. Seriously, Andor might be my favorite Star Wars show, and it's clearly the best one. Those who haven't seen Andor will probably scoff at this statement, given that it's a prequel of a prequel about a character barely anyone cared about. However, the beauty of this show is that while it follows Cassian Andor, it uses him to explore some fascinating aspects of the Star Wars universe. Many criticize this show because it doesn't feel like Star Wars to them, and if that's because it lacks fan service, then that's one of the reasons why it works so well. Whereas many other Star Wars shows rely on fan service, Andor simply aims to tell a compelling story, and that it does, over multiple well-structured arcs. I love how each of those arcs highlight different kinds of rebellions, the first one being a mini uprising on Ferrix, which eventually develops into a full-scale one in the season finale. There's also a big heist where a ragtag group steals the entire quarterly payroll from the Empire, and a prison break where all the inmates rise up against their oppressive captors. It's no wonder Andor went from not caring about the rebellion to following the cause fully, considering he got wrongfully detained with a ridiculous sentence, on top of his surrogate mother dying with a wish for rebellion. It's very understandable, as the Empire is so oppressive and fascist, which this show portrays better than most Star Wars content. Although Andor's arcs are distinct, they're very much connected, and there are consequences from the events that happen. The Empire getting more aggressive with their laws as larger cases of rebellion occur, which affects the prison sentences as Andor gets arrested, and Mon Mothma has to adjust her political strategies as well. The politics are very thorough and interesting to follow, and the different factions makes the world building so engrossing. Like the politics, the dialogue is very eloquent and clever, with many memorable lines and deliveries from the wonderful cast. One way out! One way out! The crew behind the show is also amazing, making Andor one of the prettiest looking shows out there, almost movie quality, especially during the eye. There are a bunch of plain looking locations, but I'm pretty sure that's intentional, and at least they look real, involving no volume technology. Despite how much I'm praising Andor, the slow pace holds it back from being one of my favorite shows. I do acknowledge that the slow moments are always in service of the plot, however, and builds up to stunning set pieces that makes it all worth it. Each of the climaxes hits so hard. I've been longing for a consistently great Star Wars show with no filler, so I simply can't let the slow pace dissuade me from appreciating it. In an age of Disney Star Wars, I'm glad Rogue One and Andor retaliate against the mid. Although the show follows Cassian Andor, my favorite character was Luthen Rael. This guy has such a fantastic introduction in episode 3, already delivering banger lines and fighting like a badass. His monologue in episode 10 alone includes many fantastic quotes like, "I made my mind a sunless space," I'm condemned to use the tools of my enemy to defeat them. And I burn my life to make a sunrise I know I'll never see. This speech summarizes the character perfectly, Luthen sacrificing himself to rid the galaxy of the fascist empire. What's interesting is that this doesn't prevent Luthen from being morally questionable as well, willing to use dirty tricks in his battles, like letting allies die for tactical advantage. Stellan Skarsgård delivers an intimidating performance to match, and manages to make Luthen endearing as his alter ego in Coruscant, where selling rare artifacts is a cover to contact allies of the rebellion. He's one of the best written Star Wars characters, and I'm eager to see how his arc concludes in the next season. It was tough to pick my favorite episode of Andor between Season 1 Episode 3 Reckoning, Season 1 Episode 6 The Eye, Season 1 Episode 10 One Way Out, and the one I ultimately went with, Season 1 Episode 12 Rick's Road. What connects these episodes is that they're all climaxes to their respective arcs, and I found it appropriate to choose the episode that didn't just conclude an arc, but the first season as a whole. Everything has led up to this, the Empire's unfairness pushing the people of Ferrix over the edge, and setting Andor on the path to rebellion. The build-up within this episode is as powerful as the build-up throughout the season. The way the marching band slowly makes their way down Rick's Road while ignoring the Empire's direction builds the tension, and later ramping up the music heightens that tension. Man, Ferrix's tight-knit community is so well realized, making me care about it despite barely knowing any of the characters. Marva's post-mortem speech at her funeral is so impactful, inspiring the people of Ferrix to fight the Empire. I love that Brasso used the brick that Marva got turned into to bonk some Imperials. It's what she would have wanted, and I love that the Anvil Man joined the fight as well. The sheer chaos of the scene is so well realized, with explosions, smoke, and primal instinct. The importance of small insurrections like these was pointed out earlier in the episode in Nemik's manifesto, which delivers some expertly written lines that sum up the show's themes. Ferrix might suffer a huge blow from the Empire after this, but their little uprising dealt a huge blow to the Empire as well, throwing its control into disarray so that the rebellion can one day defeat it. Andor will play a big part in this, as we know from his eventual sacrifice in Rogue One, and I'm curious to see how the show will bridge the gap. Perhaps The Eye or One Way Out were better episodes, but Rick's Road felt like it encapsulated the show best, and there's something about Declaration of War episodes that just hit, between this, Attack on Titan, and Black Sails. Number 9. Better Call Saul Season 6. House of the Dragon and Andor were both great prequels from big franchises, but Better Call Saul was just a little better. I'll admit, I've been sleeping on Breaking Bad's prequel show about Saul Goodman. In TV show countdowns, I've placed Better Call Saul seasons unreasonably low. Even when I really enjoyed Season 5, I only put it at 7th in the 2020 countdown. But to be fair, there were minor gaps between number 7 to number 2 in that list. It's just a shame that Better Call Saul got the short end of the stick. Well, not anymore, as my rewatch last year bumped Season 5 up to number 3 on that list, only behind the 4th season of Haikyuu and My Hero Academia. I am still sleeping on the show, however, because while I acknowledge that it's amazing, it's not one of my favorites. There's just something about the concept and slow pace that makes me not care about it as much as I would like to. Season 6 is on the stacked list for a reason though. It comes out swinging rather quickly, which you'd expect of a final season, already killing off such a major character like Nacho in episode 3, and both the character and his actor went out with a bang. There were some episodes of downtime after that, but they gave necessary setup for a banger mid-season finale, where Saul's lawyer and crime worlds finally clashed, leading to the shocking moment where Lalo kills Howard. I'll admit the plan and execution is perhaps a bit too complex to realistically pull off, much like Lalo's 4D chess body double in episode 1, but they do impress me. The last half of the season also came back with a bang, point and shoot offering some of the most thrilling action in the series. Some were let down by Lalo's conclusion, but I thought it made for an awesome Gus scene, whom I consider the better villain anyway, though again, his plan was a bit convoluted and convenient. The next episode ended the prequel era to great effect, giving the characters fitting conclusions, and the heartbreaking scene between Kim and Saul at the end turned me misty-eyed. I honestly thought the next episode, Nippy, was the season's low point. After seeing Breaking Bad Saul at the end of the last episode, I was expecting more of that before getting to Gene Takovic, but Nippy's biggest flaw was the complete change in the taxi driver's actor and personality. In Season 5, the taxi driver was confident and threatening, yet in Season 6, he's bumbling and insecure. The character's course over the rest of the show isn't bad, but I simply cannot buy that this is the same character. It's so disconnected from his past self. Now, this isn't a big knock against the show, but considering how consistent the writers of the Breaking Bad universe are, even in terms of not knowing a story's future plot developments, this is such an odd oversight. The episode after it is fortunately better and is aptly titled Breaking Bad, where Walter White and Jesse Pinkman show up for the first time in the show. It was great to see them again. It also goes back to the Breaking Bad episode where Saul got introduced, aptly titled Better Call Saul. It's like poetry, they rhyme. The penultimate episode is aptly titled Waterworks, and this is getting redundant, as most episodes in both shows are aptly titled. This one displayed some more phenomenal acting from Kim's actress Rhea Seehorn, who absolutely killed this season, almost literally. Like, she was fierce back in episode 2, and continued acting even worse than Saul for some time, but I am glad she decided to do the right thing in the end, telling Howard's wife about the truth of his death and what Kim did. The series finale was pretty much a perfect way to end the show, and possibly the Breaking Bad universe as a whole. I do prefer Breaking Bad's Felina by a lot, but Saul Gone was lovely, and of a similar quality if I'm being unbiased. The whole season concluded things really well for the most part. Many, including myself, thought Kim was going to die, but I eventually predicted that she would live, and I'm so glad she did. Just because she's nowhere to be found in Breaking Bad doesn't mean she has to be dead, and Better Call Saul gave a logical explanation for her absence. Even though Howard and Lalo died, they're kind of in Breaking Bad, as they're both buried in Gus's meth lab. Lalo also gets mentioned in that show, along with Nacho. Better Call Saul did so well recontextualizing scenes in Breaking Bad, not to mention crossing over with it by the end. I love that both Jesse and Walt appeared in one episode each after their appearance together, in meaningful ways at that. Jesse did look a bit old, but he was nevertheless gold. Despite the heavy Breaking Bad influence, the show doesn't rely on it to tell a good story, but rather uses it to elevate the story. The show still does just fine with its original characters, and explorations of already established ones, like Kid Named Finger. The rest of the cast and crew also show a high level of competency, giving Oscar-worthy performances and showcasing some of the best cinematography in television. Seriously, there are so many dynamic, creative, and beautiful shots, strung together with skillful editing. The TV duo greatness that is Breaking Bad and Better Call Saul is truly a miracle. Bravo Vince, and bravo Gould. There are so many wonderful characters to choose between as my favorite, like Mike Ehrmantraut, Gustavo Fring, Lalo Salamanca, Nacho Varga, Howard Hamlin, and Kim Wexler, who I almost went with. But Gene Takovic / Slippin' Jimmy / Saul Goodman / James McGill won me over in the end. That pretty much summarizes the ending. He's been an outstanding character throughout Better Call Saul, and I particularly loved him in Season 5, where he was full Saul Goodman, being a master prankster and delivering absolute comedy gold. That carries over to the final season, where he accuses someone of anti-Semitism in hilarious fashion, and pulls big-brain schemes on various victims. It was all fun and games until he destroyed Howard's career. Saul did seem hesitant about it, but went through with it since Kim insisted, displaying their toxic influence on each other. It didn't go well for anyone involved, and while Kim couldn't carry on with her guilt, Saul basically coped so hard that he entered an indefinite state of mind that explains why he's so one-note in Breaking Bad. He eventually changed his identity to Gene Takovic, who was hesitant at first to take risks in fear of being discovered, but as usual, he reverted back to Slippin' Jimmy. He's caught soon after and puts on his Saul Goodman act, managing to get off with a mere 7.5-year prison sentence despite his ginormous crimes working for Heisenberg. His facade breaks a bit when he hears about Kim coming out with her involvement in Howard's death, but continues acting like Saul, and has her attend his trial. It seems he might throw Kim under the bus to improve his own sentence even further, but what he does instead is so beautiful. He tells the judge that he helped Heisenberg not because he was forced to, but because he wanted to, and nullifies Kim's own crimes, earning himself 86 years of jail time while Kim gets off the hook. It's a beautiful last play by Saul Goodman, who now proudly proclaims himself as James McGill. What a beautiful end to his character, the show, and potentially the Breaking Bad universe. My favorite episode was either the mid-season finale, Season 6, Episode 7, Plan and Execution, or the series finale, Season 6, Episode 13, Saul Gone. But since I just talked a bit in depth about the latter, I'll discuss the former. Plan and Execution is another clever title, not just referring to Saul and Kim executing their elaborate plan to ruin Howard's career, but also Howard literally being executed by Lalo in the end. That was such a shocking scene, the most dangerous threat entering Saul and Kim's apartment again, and although Howard was the only one to die in the episode, you probably feared for Kim as well. Saul's lawyer and criminal roads finally converged, and it sure was explosive. I like how Lalo attaching a silencer to his pistol was paralleled earlier in the episode by Howard twisting a shaken soda can so that it wouldn't pop. Howard really was such a wholesome character, making his final scene hurt so much, and it didn't help that Saul and Kim had already humiliated him completely beforehand. It is satisfying to see Saul and Kim's ridiculously elaborate plan come to fruition after so much build-up, but it's also unbearably cringe to watch, as Howard plays right into their hands. He's tricked into thinking the judge at the Sandpiper settlement is in league with Saul, and thus accuses him of that, derailing the whole event. When he gets the photographs that would provide evidence, they've been switched, and his pupils dilate at the same time, making him appear like a crazy drug addict in front of everyone. All the while, Saul and Kim are banging as they listen in on this chicanery. Howard is completely right when he later tells them that they get off on doing stuff like this. In fact, he's spitting straight facts the whole time he's at their apartment. It's so powerful to hear Howard put them in their place while saying that he'll land on his feet, as he's worked his way through debt, depression, and his marriage falling apart, which makes his sudden death so tragic. Lalo truly is a menace. The reveal that he's watching Gus's laundromat from the sewers was simultaneously exciting and terrifying. Also funny, especially since he makes sewer vlogs with an old camera. Speaking of filmmaking, the scene involving Saul's budget film crew was shot so cleanly, with a pretty long one-shot. So much impactful shooting, and we're not even on point and shoot. Plan and Execution was an amazing way to cap off the first part of the season, which would lead to an equally amazing series finale. Number 8. Schindler's List. Let's break away from 2022 a bit to talk about a classic piece of cinema. Why? Because I watched Schindler's List in 2022, because I want media variety, and because I can. Okay, I technically watched this movie long ago in school of all things, which in hindsight was not appropriate to show to kids, considering how brutally realistic it is, but I digress. I count 2022 as my first time watching it, because I truly paid attention to it this time, because I want to talk about it, and because I can. Schindler's List is a 1993 movie directed by the legendary Steven Spielberg, based on a true story about the Nazi Oskar Schindler who saved over 1,000 Jews. Yeah, you heard that right. There was actually a Nazi who saved that many Jews during World War II, and if that's not a story worth putting to film, I don't know what is. That fact already gives the main character grounds for an inspirational redemption arc, and the fact that it's based on reality makes it even more beautiful. The realistic portrayal of the Nazis' cruel oppression over the Jews simultaneously makes it jarring, disgusting, and depressing. It's exactly how we should feel about it, so Spielberg did a tremendous job at playing with our emotions. No one is safe. People are constantly being killed for no reason, and there are several haunting set pieces. One that comes to mind is the scene where the Jewish girls and women are accidentally sent to a concentration camp in Auschwitz, and it seems like they're about to get gassed. Even though I had seen the movie before and vaguely recalled that it was just a normal shower, I was dreading that they would be gassed, as the implications were so strong. The most relentless sequence is when the Nazis raid the Krakow ghetto, forcing Jews into labor camps and killing those that don't comply, including children. The scene that moves me the most is when Oskar Schindler has to say goodbye to the Jews he saved and cries that he could have saved more had he not wasted so much money. The irony is that if he hadn't spent so much money, he wouldn't have managed to keep up appearances and save these Jews. Those Jews working for Schindler were a loophole that allowed so many of them to be saved, as they'd received protection from him, initially because he used them for profit, but later because he came to care about them and see them as people. It's a brilliant plan, which didn't even start out as a plan to rescue them, but the fact that it became that makes it so incredible and shows unbelievable growth. This despicable man turned into a compassionate one from interacting with his supposed inferiors and realizing that they're equals. That really speaks to how we can mitigate prejudice by understanding and sympathizing with each other. Of course, it's easier said than done, but considering a Nazi was able to befriend his supposed enemies, you'd think anyone should be able to. Despite how great the movie is, I love how it's presented with a black and white look. It totally fits the historical nature of it and makes it feel more artistic. It also makes it so that when color suddenly appears, it's very impactful, like the infamous girl in the red coat, who Oskar Schindler follows during the Krakow ghetto raid. It's so devastating to later see her red coat among the pile of dead bodies to be burned. It's also powerful when the Schindler Jew actors, filmed in black and white, turn into the actual Schindler Jews of the present, filmed in color. Them paying their respects to Oskar Schindler at his grave is such a bittersweet way to end it. I like how the film both feels like a fictional story as well as a documentary, giving textual information about what happened after the war, for instance. I also have to mention that the music composed by the legendary John Williams is incredibly moving, and the Jewish songs are wonderful too. There have been plenty of media texts centered around World War II, but Schindler's List is the best one I've witnessed, exposing me to the best and worst of humanity in the most realistic depiction possible. Number 7. Mass Effect 3. I'm still not done with non-2022 stuff, because I also need to talk about Mass Effect 3, which came out in 2012, so I played it on its 10th anniversary through the Legendary Edition. I was itching to play it by the end of 2021, as it had been a couple of months since I played the first two, but I wasn't near my PS5 at the time. When I finally got around to playing Mass Effect 3 near the start of 2022, I immediately got into it. Shepard finally visited Earth, and it was powerful to see it be ravaged by gigantic Reapers, heightening the stakes tremendously. There are plenty of towering Reapers to see throughout levels, and they're always a sight to behold. The somber music playing as you leave Earth might be my favorite track in the series. It captures the moment perfectly. It's cool that you get to visit Mars as well, where Liara finally becomes your squad mate again. It's definitely beneficial to have the Shadow Broker herself by your side, who collects information from all corners of the galaxy. Soon after, you find an actual live Prothean who's been in stasis for 50,000 years, which had me shook. Javik is such a fascinating character to talk to, and although he's quite radical with outdated views, I like how he gradually becomes more compassionate over the course of the story. Edie becoming a squad mate by transferring her consciousness into a hotbot was a pleasant surprise as well, and led to some fun moments with the Joker. The best moment of the game, however, was the Tuchanka mission, as it delivered a satisfying payoff to the complex Genophage plotline, which had been built up since the first game. It highlights two of my favorite characters, Rex and Morden, whom I'm so glad I didn't leave for dead in the prior games.
Someone else might have gotten it wrong.
Morden did die on this mission, and while that's super sad, considering he's my favorite character, he went out in the best way possible, finally correcting his mistake by curing the Genophage, allowing the Krogans to repopulate. That might not have been ideal if Reeve was leading the Krogans, which is a possibility, but fortunately for my run, his brother Rex was leading the Krogans in a progressive direction. It blows my mind that both Rex and Morden can be absent from this mission, which can also be the case with other characters in the missions. There are so many ways this mission can go depending on choices you've made throughout the trilogy, but I'm pretty sure I got the best outcome, and it was a pleasure to experience. I also loved seeing the Queen of the Thresher Moss take out a Reaper, and hearing Morden sing one last time.
I studied species Turian, a saurian, Batarian. As in our science studies range from urban to agrarian, I am the very model of...
It's definitely the most emotional I've been during the trilogy. This first stretch of the game was peak Mass Effect to me, and while the game continued being great, it did drop off a bit. Kai Lame gets introduced, an edgy samurai wannabe who really didn't deserve to kill Thane, but that did make taking revenge for him super satisfying.
That was for Thane, you son of a bitch!
The Rannoch mission had some great payoff as well, being similarly built up like the Tuchanka mission, as the Quarian vs Geth storyline had also been a focus since the first game. It didn't connect with me as strongly as the Tuchanka mission, but it's still fantastic, putting Tali and Legion at the forefront. Unless they died in Mass Effect 2, that is, but in my run they fortunately didn't. I probably got the best outcome again, in which the Quarians live in harmony with the Geth, though that sadly required Legion's sacrifice. Tali confirming Legion's question of, does this unit have a soul? And Legion's last words being the Quarian saying, kill us alive, is such a beautiful moment. I've seen that this mission can go horribly if you make slightly different choices, like the Geth destroying the Quarian fleet, prompting Tali to commit suicide on her homeworld. I'm glad I got the more wholesome ending. The mission also has you fighting a Reaper, which displayed an epic scale, but I'll admit it felt mechanically wonky. I'm still not a fan of Mass Effect's gameplay, but 3 definitely had the best of the trilogy. You can finally run infinitely, meaning the monotony of getting through long corridors is gone. Combat is also improved with better weapons, including the Omni Blade for melee, and the ability to dodge makes the action more dynamic. I'm also glad this game ditched not just the Mako, but the Hammerhead as well. I found the Hammerhead an improvement over the Mako, but I still didn't like it very much, so good riddance to both. This game surely has the best side content in the series because of this, and because they provide good writing. Some of these involve squad mates from previous games, unless they died before 3, that is, and they're used pretty well. Jack becoming a teacher with a soft spot for her students was a nice direction, and apparently she can be turned into an enemy by Cerberus if you don't do her mission, so that's fascinatingly depressing. Some sad music had me convinced that Grunt was gonna die by the end of his mission, so that was a comically cruel fake out. I later found out that he would have died if I hadn't earned his loyalty in the previous game, which was the case for Saeed, as he was the only Mass Effect 2 squad mate who didn't become loyal to me. Mass Effect 2's loyalty missions did valuable legwork to make me care about these characters, but the game's lack of main plot disappointed me, so I'm glad Mass Effect 3 brought it back to the forefront, which it kinda had to, considering it's the trilogy's conclusion. After having explored the galaxy so thoroughly and gained so many allies throughout the first 2 games, acquiring enough war assets to fight the Reapers as a driving force for 3 story is simply perfect. The game kinda feels like a best of Mass Effect compilation where everyone you've met comes together to fight a common enemy. It's the reason the game has such strong payoff to long-running storylines. It's just a shame that the ending isn't given justice, the amount of war assets not contributing much to how it plays out. The ending is the trilogy's biggest point of contention, and yeah, it is quite disappointing. Instead of decisions you've taken throughout the whole trilogy leading to any number of different endings, you're given 3 choices at the very end no matter what, and they're all rather questionable. In the Control ending, Shepard takes control of the Reapers, meaning she's the sole dictator of the galaxy. Now, she might make morally good and just decisions, but it's still a dictatorship, and who's to say she won't change for the worse over time, potentially repeating the Reaper harvest? In the Synthesis ending, you turn everyone into synthetic beings, which seems nice, but it feels off, as if everyone's brainwashed, living in blissful ignorance. Both of those endings validate the Reapers too, which I find pretty messed up considering their history, not to mention that everyone's goal was to destroy them. That's why I think Destroy is the best ending of the lot, but that's not an ideal ending either, since you have to destroy synthetic beings like the Geth and Edie in the process. Even though it's the best ending possible, it's not the one I chose. The funny thing is, I was unsure of which ending to choose, and while deliberating, I randomly shot at the Star Child to see if anything would happen, and surely enough, there's a 4th ending. When the Star Child said, "So be it,"
the cycle continues.
I laughed my ass off. It's such a fuck you to the player, but I kinda love it. It is a shame there aren't more endings, however. It would have been great if you could achieve a perfect ending, where all squad mates, including Shepard, survived, and an ending where all squad mates, including Shepard, died, like in Mass Effect 2. To be honest, I thought the whole game would be a suicide mission, where your squad mates could die at any point if you weren't careful enough. That would have been such a thrill ride. I was hoping the final mission would be more exciting, but it paled in comparison to the suicide mission, both in terms of stakes and gameplay variety. Bad ending and untapped potential aside, however, I think 3 is my favorite game in the series. It has too much peak content to leave a bad taste in my mouth. That said, due to its incompleteness, I can't call it better than 2. I played it on the Legendary Edition, so I got to experience all the DLCs, but the game loses a lot without them. I was shocked to discover that Javik is a DLC character. You'd think such an important character as the last living Prothean would be part of the main game, but apparently not. The Citadel DLC also adds to the game's quality, where you're able to have fun with your squad mates, whether it be in high-stakes missions or low-stakes parties. It offers some of the funniest moments in the whole trilogy, often poking fun at character traits, like Shepard repeatedly saying, "I should go."
Maybe it's I should go. I should go. I should go.
Shepard, please!
And the way Rex and Grunt say her name, only more exaggerated this time.
Shepard.
Grunt.
Shepard.
Rex.
Commander Shepard. Shepard, Shepard, Shepard.
Rex. Grunt.
Shepard. Shepard. Shepard.
The Mass Effect trilogy might have been an undisputed masterpiece had EA not rushed its development. That company has truly stained the games industry. In spite of this, Mass Effect 3 is a great game, at least if you include the DLCs and don't focus too much on the conclusion. The destination might have sucked, but the journey was worth it.
Best times of my life were spent on that ship. Been a damn good ride.
The best.
Number 6. Shadow the Hedgehog Real-Time Fan Dub. It may be weird to see a YouTube video in a ranking of movies, TV shows, and video games, but this shadow dub feels like a movie to me, and a superb one at that, hence its high placement. I've been a massive fan of Snapcube's fan dub since I saw the utterly hilarious Sonic Adventure 2 Dark Story dub in 2020, and I considered including the Sonic Riders dub in my 2020 movies countdown, but it didn't feel appropriate at the time. Since this list is so all over the place, however, I'm not that concerned about including a dub from YouTube here. It was the Sonic Riders dub that teased the exciting promise of a Shadow the Hedgehog dub, which was fulfilled 2 years later, and it certainly delivered. That said, I was a bit disappointed the first time I saw it, thinking that it didn't live up to the terrific dubs of Dark Story, 06, and Riders. But as is often the case for me, a rewatch made me appreciate it more, and I pretty much enjoy the Shadow dub just as much as those now. Snapcube dubs are impressive for being surprisingly cohesive despite their improv nature, the voice actors having to think up lines on the spot in a live recording, and I noticed on my rewatch just how cohesive the Shadow dub is. It's an entire hour of unscripted improv, and yet it feels like a story that's been deliberately stitched together for the most part, which is so impressive. This is made possible by the voice actors establishing several potential plot threads, themes, and jokes early on, determining the natural progression for the rest of the story. Near the start of the dub, Shadow is confronted by the devil, you know, from the Bible, who wants Shadow to commit sin so that he can join the devil in hell. Shadow tries accumulating sin points throughout the story, but not so he can join the devil, rather to usurp him and become the new ruler of hell. That's a solid setup for the voice actors to work with, and it really is a fitting premise for a dub of such an edgy game. A major theme in this dub is that of parasociality, aka one-sided relationships. Over the course of the dub, it becomes increasingly clear that the devil wants to befriend Shadow, and that Shadow couldn't care less. Shadow eventually learns that he was created by Gerald Robotnik so that the devil could be Shadow's friend in 50 years, although it's later revealed that Gerald made Shadow hate the devil instead as a joke, which is an absolutely hilarious twist. A more minor parasocial relationship that's nonetheless thematically relevant is the president and his Twitch subs, one of them being all giddy at meeting the president and donating bits on the spot. Other jokes are consistently used, like abrupt cuts to Sonic, Eggman and the Devil dying, the commander's audio equipment, which is literally just a gun, and presidential jokes, which relate to Shadow wanting to rule over Hell, as the POTUS is apparently the most powerful being. The Shadow dub is consistent with previous Sonic dubs as well, referencing them every now and then. There's obviously the obligatory Pumpkin Hill and 1907 callbacks, but also Sonic's former romantic relationship with the president, and Maria containing the smell of Shadow's farts. Eggman's iconic Super Laser Piss even makes an appearance, along with Bitch Ass Motherfucker, which references the most iconic scene in fandom history, Eggman's announcement in the Dark Story dub. Eggman in that dub has yet to be topped. It's still Alfred Coleman's peak voice acting performance as far as I'm concerned, but he definitely did an amazing job in the Shadow dub as well. He's pretty funny as the isolated president, especially when he makes the most random guttural noise. Eggman has some truly hilarious moments, like admitting to his gambling addiction, don't be like him, suddenly dying multiple times, and his last words being, I'm dying. Eggman is Shadow's main competitor in getting sin points, so there's a lot of back and forth between them, making for their best dynamic since the Dark Story dub. Even then, I think the best dynamic in this dub is the one between Shadow and the Devil. This is such a comedic duo. I love how the Devil continuously pops up out of nowhere to tell Shadow that he's failing at sinning, claiming that killing the president and destroying military equipment will send him to heaven instead. The Devil is such a standout in this dub. I love how hard he tries to befriend Shadow, yet is often an asshole to him, and his confused reactions to visual elements like Eggman's Armada and the alien are priceless. He's also voiced to perfection by the legendary Chase Young, who I think is my favorite Snapcube voice actor at this point. He has a long and ferocious rant as the Devil that might actually rival Eggman's, and his Markiplier character in the Until Dawn dub might be my favorite character in all the fan dubs due to how ingeniously meta he is. Despite how fantastic the Devil is in the Shadow dub, I feel inclined to select the titular character as my favorite. Ryan Mitchum's take on Shadow the Hedgehog has always been amazing in every dub he's been in, so I was excited for him to take center stage in this dub, and he certainly gave his best performance yet, which is saying something. He's such a snarky little bitch. Some of my favorite moments are when another character says something, then it abruptly cuts to their death scenes and Shadow responds perfectly. The best of which being when the Devil talks about that time Shadow accidentally broke a toy and said, "Them's the breaks, pal," and Shadow repeating that immediately afterwards as the Devil dies. Shadow has such good comebacks and one-liners in this dub. Like when Sonic calls him an asshole and Shadow instantly replies, "You're what you eat, Sonic." He's truly a menace to this society. Beyond Shadow's attitude and jokes, his development in this dub is also wonderful. Shadow disregards the Devil who obsesses over him, but Shadow himself obsesses over Maria, still dwelling on the fact that he couldn't save her from dying. The Shadow the Hedgehog game apparently has several different story routes that have been cleverly stitched together in this dub to form a time loop narrative, which can symbolize Shadow not being able to let go of the past. Only at the end, when Shadow throws away the picture of Maria, does he break the time loop. Perhaps he could see himself in the Devil and decided that his own obsession isn't worth it. Perhaps I'm reading too much into it, considering that these dubs are never perfectly intricate. I do think my interpretation makes sense, however, as in an earlier scene, Shadow tells the Devil that he's not gonna determine how Shadow lives, and literally says, "I am all of me," referencing Shadow the Hedgehog's main theme. On that note, Penny Parker did an awesome rendition of the song as the opening credits to the dub, a perfect way to set the tone. She also made a banger rap with Chase to end the dub, using the funky Final Haunt composition as the beat. Penny's performance in this dub is great. She's always had a terrific Sonic voice, and she uses it to contribute some of the funniest moments despite her limited screen time, especially when Sonic barks like a dog. Penny also edits these fan dubs quite professionally and runs Snapcube to begin with, so huge kudos to her. As a maker of dubs, I aspire to reach Snapcube's quality. I doubt I'll ever have the same improv skills, but hopefully I can ride on a similar level to how well thought out these improvised dubs are. Number 5. RRR. This is a certified Indian banger. I associate Indian film with Bollywood, but Rise Roar Revolt is apparently a Tollywood movie, from Telugu, which I hadn't even heard of, so good on RRR for making me aware of it, and good on word of mouth for making me aware of RRR. I've barely seen any Indian movies. I can only think of M. Night Shyamalan films if those count, but I don't think they're typical Indian cinema. When I think of Indian movies, I think about the sheer insanity I've seen from clips. And don't get me wrong, RRR is sheer insanity incarnate, but I did not expect it to handle that insanity so expertly. Behind the ridiculous spectacle is a moving story about two Indian chads who form the greatest bromance in cinema despite being on opposite sides. Seriously, the bromance between Kumaram Bhim and Alluri Sitarama Raju is so awesome, and the movie makes me care about it greatly. Raju is actually tasked with hunting down Bhim, but Raju doesn't specifically know the identity of his target, so when they work together to save an Indian kid and recognize each other's game, it makes sense, and it's such a wonderful payoff, only half an hour in. This movie is 3 hours long, and I did have to take some breaks to process what I had been watching, but it remains fantastic throughout its run, and it was already one of my favorite movies an hour in. It promises greatness early on, giving the two leads powerful character introductions. I love how Raju has a will so strong that he's able to wrestle with a crowd of thousands of protesters, just to catch a single protester so that he can rise up the ranks in the British Empire. He doesn't even get promoted from that, which feeds into the movie's heavy theme of racism. Bhim's introduction has him wrestling with a tiger and highlights his care for nature and life. They're both excellent characters, and together they're a match made in heaven. I love how over the top yet brilliant their plan to rescue a kid is, and I especially love how they get an entire montage dedicated to their blossoming friendship, complete with a matching song that slaps. In fact, all the songs in this movie are bangers. There's a reason Natu won an Oscar. I do think the dance number is the highlight of that scene, but it wouldn't have worked without the song. The moment when Raju kicked the silver plate in the air and started drumming on it, I lost my shit. It was such a cathartic moment while Bhim was being bullied by a racist white prick, and the following dance is the stuff of legend. They're in perfect synchronicity, until Raju decides to lose so that Jenny will be proud of Bhim. Raju really is the ultimate wingman, and my favorite RRR character. Not only is he utterly awesome, but complex as well. I mean, he's an Indian serving the British military, seemingly being their greatest ally, but in actuality, he's rising up the ranks so that he can get access to weapons that he can give to other Indians, so that they'll be strong enough to fight the British Empire. The pacing kind of gets halted by a long flashback to Raju's backstory, but it is a necessary explanation of his motivations that's so well realized. It's such a sad moment when he realizes that Bhim is his target, and Raju won't even look him in the eye while trying to arrest him. Their fight is so damn good. I love how their fire and water analogies come into full effect, literally fighting each other using the elements. It made for some unreal imagery. The whole palace invasion is masterful, Bhim sicking a bunch of deadly animals on the Brits. The leopard throw and use of deer antlers are so sick. While Natu is probably my favorite musical sequence of the film, the Kumaram Bhimudo song at Bhim's flogging resonates with me the most. It might not make sense that Bhim is standing tall and singing effortlessly while being flogged with a thorny whip by a powerful alpha male, but it's just so beautiful, and most of the movie isn't concerned with real-world logic anyway, which is honestly one of its strengths. It feels like a live-action anime, and an amazing one at that, which might be a first, considering how bad those tend to be. Anyway, the flogging scene is beautifully tragic, Raju wiping away tears while whipping away Bhim's skin, and Bhim singing a song so moving that it moves the oppressed Indians to finally rise, roar, and revolt. It's wonderful that Raju tries to rescue Bhim after this, and though it's sad that he's injured and imprisoned, it's so badass that he still does pull-ups. I died of laughter when he continued doing pull-ups on the tiny cell's jail bars. You gotta respect the dedication. Raju's wife Sita enters the plot in a nice way, telling Bhim about Raju's backstory and motivations, which motivates Bhim to rescue him. They're finally best friends again, and their prison escape is absolutely epic. Two alpha male chads become one unstoppable force, and the next fight scene delivers even more peak masculinity. The forest battle is insane, featuring excellent choreography and teamwork, not to mention a song that hypes their identities up. The final blow against the Brits is explosive as well, and calls back to when Bhim and Raju first teamed up, communicating their plan without words. The climax is so perfect, Raju giving Bhim a rifle, telling him to load, aim, shoot, and Bhim killing Blackbeard, his blood spilling on the British Empire's motto. Rest in peace, Ray Stevenson. You were a badass. The final song and dance number might not beat some of the others, but it's a satisfyingly wholesome respite after having experienced so much insanity. I suppose the movie's most notable flaws are the CG animals in completely black and white portrayals of Brits, but they're like that by design. In the first place, India doesn't like hurting animals in real life, which is why they make them CG, and although it is noticeable, it doesn't ruin the experience whatsoever. The movie looks stunning otherwise, featuring some of the most insane shots I've seen, especially considering the choreography and scope. I'm fine with the Brits being cartoony, as it works to make them hateable villains, though I'll admit some of the acting wasn't that good. No matter, because the acting of the two leads is Oscar-worthy. They really brought their A-game, expertly pulling off complicated action scenes, emotional scenes, and dance numbers. To sum up this masterpiece in 3 words, rad, raw, ram. Number 4. My Hero Academia Season 6. What? I put Mid-Hero this high on my list, above Better Call Saul's own Season 6? What can I say? Okay, I'll stop doing the voice. What can I say? I love this series, and I think my praise for it is pretty warranted this time. Season 5 was so disappointing, adapting the manga poorly and making several fans of the anime disillusioned with it, enough to shit on Season 6, even though it's clearly the peak of My Hero. Sure, the production quality is still far from the best, especially comparing it to Studio Bones' other darling Mob Psycho 100, but it's fairly solid and adapts the best arc of the manga, namely the Paranormal Liberation War. The 100 plus episodes build-up have led to this arc, which finally pits the heroes against the villains in a large-scale war. So many characters get time to shine, big and small, and the stakes have never been higher. I mean, sure, you would expect more deaths to come from this war, but pretty much everyone gets badly wounded on both sides. Even though it looks like the heroes and villains tied in this battle, it's clear that the heroes lost dramatically, failing to protect the status quo after a disaster walker destroyed a big portion of Japan, and a vengeful sun exposed the top heroes, turning the public against heroes in general. The implications of this arc are monumental, but I'll reserve that discussion for the 2023 list, as only the first core got released in 2022. I'm so glad Season 6 dropped the filler premiere episode this time, which automatically gave it an advantage over the past 4 seasons. My Hero is often criticized for halting the pace, but this arc quickly goes full throttle and doesn't stop. There's a bit of build-up in the first episode, but the raid starts about halfway in, and already in the next episode, we see Mirko kicking ass and killing Nomus with her power thighs, nearly dying in the process. It's great to see a bunch of competent pro heroes do their thing, and there are a lot of them here. I don't think the arc becomes amazing until episode 3, however, where undercover agent Hawks betrays Twice. It's such an emotional episode, Hawks trying to convince Twice to leave the villains, but Twice refusing because they're the only people who accepted him. Twice's death scene is super impactful, and it was directed so well with such powerful music. The next episode displayed some fantastic animation throughout, without censoring much of the gore, showing how dangerous the situation really is. Shigaraki's Dreamscape is one of the best manga reading experiences I've had, and it was animated beautifully, in a style reminiscent of Mob Psycho 100. The symbolism of Shigaraki's family grabbing him with the hands he used to cover himself with is ingenious use of character design, and he cemented his point of no return by decaying them away. Shigaraki's mass decay destruction is also crazy to watch, especially with such explosive animation that had me gasping. It was awesome to finally see the number 1 villain fight the number 1 hero, even though it's short-lived, but it does develop into a much bigger battle involving more heroes. That fight is so cleverly thought out, Aizawa being able to erase Shigaraki's quirk for so long because Manuel keeps his eyes hydrated, but Shigaraki still being ridiculously strong without his extra quirks. It's a good way to keep such an overpowered specimen in check, while still keeping him dangerous. The fight escalates when Shigaraki finds a way to put Aizawa out of commission, and my god, Aizawa stopping the quirk erasing bullet from spreading by cutting off his leg was so damn badass. Deku fortunately managed to put Shigaraki back in check by unlocking Nanashimura's float quirk, which was convenient, but it made for a cool aerial phase to the battle. It was really sad seeing a flashback of Nanashimura crying in Gran Torino's arms because she had to abandon her son, and then to watch her grandson Shigaraki seemingly kill Gran Torino in the present. As all this is happening, the UA Hero Corps students try to stop Gigantomachia from reaching Shigaraki, which is also exciting stuff. The iconic Yusei run played during it, which hasn't been used since Season 2. It was sadly cut short, as Gigantomachia managed to escape their trap, but the anesthesia Kirishima gave him did work eventually. There was a nice callback to the scene where Kirishima froze whereas Mina saved someone from Gigantomachia. This time, Mina froze from PTSD upon hearing Gigantomachia's voice again, whereas Kirishima built up the courage to save her from him this time. It's about time Kirishima had another big moment, and it displayed some good development. On that note, Bakugo sacrificing himself to save Deku proved to all the naysayers that he's actually developed quite a lot, and it was a perfect parallel to when Deku saved him. It's just a shame that the moment wasn't adapted very well, so it didn't hit as hard as it should have. What did hit, however, was Dabi's dance, which is such an integral turning point in the series. I think the arc goes a bit downhill after that. Episode 12 and 13 are still pretty strong, but not nearly as impactful. One of the strengths of this arc is that a lot happens in every episode, but it feels like a weakness in these. Mirio getting his quirk back should have been a much bigger moment, but it felt small and underemphasized. At least it was more prevalent in the anime than it was in the manga, but his appearance was still underwhelming. Episode 13 gives Mr. Compress his family reveal, which is cool, but it pales in comparison to Dabi's. Overall though, this arc is phenomenal, making my hero reach new heights that I doubt will be reached again. The rest of Season 6 is great, but Season 7 might rank low on a future list. It ain't easy picking my favorite character of this arc, as there were so many who got to shine, but my biggest contenders are Bakugo, Aizawa, Hawks, Twice, Dabi, and my pick, Tomura Shigaraki. This guy has received slow yet steady development over the course of the series, and got a major boost during My Villain Academia, preparing him for this arc where he's the ultimate supervillain. Even though he's inactive at the start, he's nonetheless a terrifying presence, given what he can do if he wakes up. He eventually does and destroys a large area with his decay, killing multiple heroes in the process, but also managing to keep important assets like the Nomus from being caught up in it. Not only is his decay ridiculous, but he also has the quirk All for One now, meaning he can use an assortment of different quirks, and I love how giddy he is while trying them out. He loves fighting the number one hero, even while having his quirks erased, as he's still overpowered without them. I like how he straight up flexes on Endeavor at one point, mimicking the pose he did after defeating the high-end Nomu, and he spits straight facts during his maggot speech. His sheer will is admirable too, and pretty much on par with Deku's. Shigaraki became truly free by the end of My Villain Academia, and that carries over to this arc, at least until he meets too much resistance and is overtaken by All for One. That will lead to some wonky storytelling in the future, but I like how it's done for now, Shigaraki not wanting to rely on his master anymore, and Deku gaining the motivation to save his worst enemy. My favorite Shigaraki moment this season is his dreamscape right before waking up, where he switches through different phases of his life while listening to his family, and eventually decays them from holding him back. Horikoshi is such a genius for tying Shigaraki's development to his morbid design. It wasn't so easy choosing my favorite episode either, which was initially Season 6 Episode 3, Once Justice, and later Season 6 Episode 4, Inheritance, but I ultimately ended up going with Season 6 Episode 11, Dabi's Dance. Horikoshi is a madman for pulling this right after such major events, and it somehow managed to top all of them. Many saw Dabi being Toya Todoroki coming from a mile away years before it got revealed, and I wanted it to be subverted somehow, but it was executed so well that I'm glad it wasn't. His real identity got revealed at the perfect time, being able to tell it to both Endeavor and Shoto, and broadcasting himself exposing Endeavor, Hawks, and heroes in general right after Gigantomachia had ravaged a big portion of Japan. He even got footage of Hawks killing Twice from earlier in the day, so the timing truly couldn't have been better. Well, except for Best Jeanist showing up after Dabi claimed him to be dead, but his broadcast was still highly effective in turning the public against the heroes. Dabi's dance turned Dabi from being a basic villain to a wonderful character. He's not in my top 10 and is closer to top 20, but his dance made him jump at least 30 spots in my character ranking. Whereas he was completely secretive before, he lets it all out here for this perfect occasion. Although he's in a lot of pain, he's filled with euphoria as he finally humiliates Endeavor and dances like a total maniac. This episode is one of the best adapted of the season, the art being consistently good, Dobby's dance being very fluid, the blue flash fire prominence burn looking beautiful, the music matching the tone, and the voice acting being full of emotion. The English, and especially the Japanese voice actor for Dobby, gave his scenes justice, and Shoto's screams along with Endeavor's rapid breathing added to the intensity. While I love this episode a lot, it's not my favorite of the series, and might not even crack my top 5. To be fair, I was expecting this for the Season 6 episodes, because while most of them are some of the best episodes of the show, there are certain episodes in previous seasons that hit harder, especially the Season 4 finale His Start. Dobby's dance contains the Uraraka and Toga confrontation, which is by no means bad, but it's one of the weaker elements of the stacked arc. It only lasts about 5 minutes though, so it doesn't diminish the episode's quality by much. While Dobby's dance sadly wasn't that big in the anime because of its decreasing popularity, the moment was so good that the manga chapter actually outtrended the US presidential election on Twitter as it was happening, which is a testament to how impactful such an obvious reveal can be if executed well. Number 3. Everything Everywhere All at Once. Like many others, I heard of Everything Everywhere All at Once through word of mouth, and didn't watch the trailers before going into it. All I knew was that it was going to be a multiverse movie, and apparently a very good one at that. It's safe to say that it lived up to its name. It really is everything, everywhere, all at once. So much is happening from the get-go, the main character Evelyn Wang having to deal with everything happening around her, not getting a moment of respite. It becomes increasingly overwhelming as the multiverse is introduced, and especially as Evelyn and her daughter Joy are jumping dimensions constantly, literally being everything, everywhere, all at once. It's an allegory for ADHD, and I'm not sure if I have it, but I can definitely relate to the struggle of having too much on my mind, especially in this day and age where we're constantly being fed information. I face this challenge as I write this script, struggling to find a coherent way to discuss this utterly complex movie while giving it justice, but I will try in the following paragraphs. Strap yourselves in. First of all, this is the best use of the multiverse concept I've witnessed. I love how people are able to gather abilities from other versions of themselves throughout the multiverse, for example martial arts, singing, and ripped pinkies. Evelyn even acquires the proud father skill from one of the universes. Now that's a hilarious detail. The way people verse jump is also hilarious, doing silly random things like humping a lamp, self-inflicted paper cuts, and possibly my favorite, snorting a fly. The way the multiverse is incorporated into the storytelling is incredible as well. Evelyn getting to understand and appreciate the people around her by seeing different sides of them in different universes, like her precious husband Waymond, who is strong despite his timid appearance. She also sees different sides of herself, her lesbian relationship with Deirdre in one universe allowing her to appreciate Deirdre in all universes, in addition to her own daughter's sexuality. The multiverse also connects to the movie's meaningful message. Given that Joy experiences every universe at the same exact time, the sheer overload of information has made her reach the conclusion that nothing matters and that she should thus commit suicide. Evelyn, meanwhile, manages to find meaning amidst the chaos, and eventually convinces Joy that because nothing matters, it's up to them to give meaning to what they care about. It's an optimistic reversal of nihilism that I think I've followed, but hadn't actually conceptualized, so I appreciate the movie for making me aware of it. It's a much better way to live life than to constantly sulk about everything, even though I do find it sad that, eventually, it all just goes away. For as heavy as this movie is, I'm glad it emphasizes comedy, and Everything Everywhere All at Once has probably made me laugh the hardest at the theater. Two of the funniest moments are set up so cleverly with Chekhov's guns. When Evelyn references Ratatouille but says Raccacoonie, the audience laughs it off as a typical mother mixing up what she's talking about. But as it turns out later in the film, there's a universe where Raccacoonie actually exists. Additionally, this reveal explains why Chad was such a good hibachi chef earlier in the film. Man, this movie is so crazy with its connections. Raccacoonie himself is crazy, controlling Chad to kill Evelyn for having seen too much, which is unbelievably funny. Raccacoonie being an animatronic adds to the hilarity, as well as the irony, considering Chad is being controlled by a literal puppet. I absolutely adore how the Chad and Raccacoonie joke develops and culminates in the most bizarre fashion, over a pretty brilliant arc in which Chad goes from being controlled to being in control. The whole Raccacoonie shenanigans is probably the funniest running gag in the movie, but what made me laugh the hardest uncontrollably at the theater was the butt plug trophy fight. This also had a cheeky Chekhov's gun earlier, Deirdre showing off her trophies that suspiciously look like butt plugs, and when Evelyn and the martial artist guy need to find new jumping pads and spot one of the trophies, you dread where that is going. The bald martial artist jumping onto it pantless had me rolling the hardest, and that uncontrollable laughter continued as the other guy found another trophy to stick up his own ass. This movie is so damn weird, but I love how insanely bold and bonkers it is, not holding anything back. By the end of the runtime, it's hard to know whether to laugh or cry or both, as super emotional scenes are intercut with Raccacoonie and hot dog fingers. I don't find the hot dog fingers the funniest, but the way the joke is set up is incredible, showing hot dog fingered apes killing off the normal ones 10 million years before Christ in a Space Odyssey reference. They didn't have to do that for a 15-second joke, but the fact that they did made it so much better. They didn't have to make the rock scene either, but I'm so glad they did. Having the movie go from utter chaos to complete silence with a mother-daughter text conversation as rocks was a stroke of genius, leading to some of the most heartfelt scenes in the movie, told through clever visual storytelling. The final act of Everything Everywhere All at Once is a non-stop emotional roller coaster that completely boggles my mind. Joy takes Evelyn to the Everything Bagel, which turns Evelyn so nihilistic that she messes things up in every universe, even stabbing Waymond. That scene already turns me misty-eyed, and then Waymond breaks the dam within me with his heartfelt speeches. He thinks all this fighting is his fault, and tries to stop it, while the non-husband version of him tells Evelyn that his pacifism is the way he fights. Evelyn finally sees his worth and hugs him, which is followed by numerous flashbacks of just how precious Waymond is, while the non-husband version of him tells Evelyn that, in another life, I would have really liked just doing laundry and taxes with you. Like, holy shit, man, what a way to hit me in the feels. That's not even the moment that moves me the most, which I'll get to soon, but first, I have to talk about how ingenious the empathy fight is. Evelyn takes a page from Waymond's book by fighting the Alphas with kindness, jumping between universes to figure out what makes them happy, and giving it to them. This includes making two people kiss and get married, helping Chad get Raccacoonie back, and showing Deirdre affection. Evelyn has had trouble with confronting her father Gong Gong, who abandoned her when she married Waymond, but now she tells Gong Gong that she isn't about to abandon her own daughter. She also tells him that Joy has a girlfriend, which Evelyn had kept from him because she thought he'd be against it, but it turns out he's accepting of it, and allows Evelyn to save Joy. That's such a surprisingly wholesome subversion. The fight scene between Evelyn and Joy is unbelievably sick, shifting between dimensions with every hit, and it's super emotional as well. From the point where Evelyn, Gong Gong, and Waymond tried to prevent Joy from committing suicide is potentially the most effectively a piece of fiction has ever moved me. Joy screams at the top of her lungs for Evelyn to stop, and begs her to let her go, which Evelyn does. Then it cuts to Rock Joy falling over the edge of a cliff, and Kid Joy running away, while Evelyn tearfully watches. Fortunately, Evelyn manages to save Joy just in the nick of time, telling Joy exactly what she needed to hear, convincing her that life can be worth living, despite nothing mattering. The following montage is perhaps the most powerful thing I've seen, intercutting between several dimensions reaching their beautiful climaxes, and Joy finally embracing Evelyn, wanting to live on. What a climax! It's insanely ambitious, yet incredibly coherent, pays off all the plot threads, and manages to make me laugh hysterically and ugly cry simultaneously. 11 out of 10 stuff. This movie is so much, yet manages to pull it off with so little. It's kind of unbelievable that this is an indie movie with a small team, a small budget, and a few filming days. It reportedly only had $25 million, which is about a tenth of the budget for Doctor Strange in the Multiverse of Madness, and somehow, Everything Everywhere All at Once is far more ambitious. Well, maybe I shouldn't say that, as I haven't seen that movie, but that's what I keep hearing. I also keep hearing that Everything Everywhere All at Once is the true multiverse of madness, and that's a pretty apt description, even though the title it already has describes it even better. This just might be the most efficient movie production ever, and is very inspirational to people who aspire to be filmmakers, like myself. In fact, this movie is actually the final piece of the puzzle that pushed me to pursue filmmaking, at the perfect time, as I was considering 3D modeling instead, which I think would be a pretty tedious career for me in hindsight. This movie could have easily flunked if the production was poor, but the cast and crew executed it incredibly. The cinematography is top notch, the whole movie looking like a professional production with many stunning and creative shots. Speaking of looking professional, despite there being only 9 visual effects artists, all of which had learned VFX from watching YouTube tutorials, the effects don't look bad at all, and only serve to enhance the movie. The editing is sublime, seamlessly juggling all the storylines and transporting the viewer between various distinguishable dimensions. Even the action is tremendous, going the extra step by hiring professional martial artists to design the choreography, and having experienced martial artists carry out the moves, in some of the most creative fight scenes I've seen. Waymond beats up a bunch of security guards using his fanny pack as a nunchuck, and Evelyn beats up a bunch of alphas by applying sign spinning techniques to a riot shield. That latter fight is paired with some fantastic opera singing, making the fight a delicious spectacle. The whole soundtrack is so dynamic, managing to keep up with the chaos and conveying the proper emotions the viewer should be feeling. There's even a Pixar-esque song by Randy Newman, who fittingly plays Raccacoonie. They were seriously cooking with this one. The movie really does have an all-star cast, featuring tremendous performances by industry legends Michelle Yeoh, Jamie Lee Curtis, and James Hong, as well as breakthrough performances by Stephanie Hsu and Ki Hugh Kwan, the latter of which making the biggest comeback after decades of being ignored, winning several awards and delivering motivational speeches, just like in the movie. The movie itself deservedly swept the 2023 award season, even going as far as winning 7 out of 11 Oscar nominations, including Best Picture. Of course, all this is made possible with the Daniels' insane writing and directing skills, putting the most galaxy-brain screenplay I've witnessed onto the big screen, and somehow making it work. While I couldn't say everything about this movie, I did have a lot to say, and I obviously didn't get all of this from just watching it a single time in the theater. The first time I saw it, I didn't completely understand it, but still gave it a solid 9 out of 10, and it's probably the best theater experience I've had, audibly reacting to it along with family and audience members, and getting surprised constantly at every turn. After thinking back on it more and watching some videos on it, my score quickly rose to a 10. I soon rewatched it in theaters, and sadly had a really bad experience, not because of the film, but rather due to my condition at that time. Even so, I could still be confident in the 10 out of 10 I had given it. I rewatched it a couple of months later on Blu-ray, often pausing it to fully digest the scenes, and I became confident that Everything Everywhere All at Once is the most 10 out of 10 fictional work ever. What shows and games take several hours to achieve is achieved in less than 2.5 hours in this film. Plenty of movies are of similar length, but few manage to accomplish so much within that time frame. The Lord of the Rings 3: The Return of the King, which might be the only other movie I've seen that can compete with Everything Everywhere All at Once, is 3 to 4 hours long, and needed 2 other super long films preceding it to be so fantastic. Does that mean Everything Everywhere All at Once is perfect? I mean, there are some jokes that don't quite hit, a few details I could have done without, and maybe some gaping plot holes I haven't discovered yet, but as far as I'm concerned, this movie is the peakest of fiction. It might not be my number 1 favorite piece of fiction on this multimodal list that's packed with things I absolutely adore, but it's so close, and it's for sure my favorite movie. Number 2. Attack on Titan Season 4 Part 2. As usual, Attack on Titan was my favorite TV show of the year, and Season 4 Part 2 made 4 my favorite season. Season 3 Part 2 is still the undisputed champion, but for as good as Part 1 of that season is, it isn't quite up to par, whereas both parts of Season 4 are about equally peak. That said, I think I prefer part 2 over part 1 by a little bit, despite having fewer episodes. But to be fair, it is because it has fewer episodes, and because MAPPA has gotten some experience adapting AOT by this point, that it looks considerably better than part 1, which had a rushed development. Part 2's development is also rushed, and it does show, but the overall quality is noticeably better. After the last part ended on such an intense cliffhanger, I was excited for this part's premiere to get right into the action, and it did, pitting Paradis against Marley in an all-out war. They don't hold back, it's as gory as you'd expect, with minimal censorship. I think my favorite moment from the first episode is actually how it starts, Zeke having a godlike rebirth and revealing that he was molded back together by a little girl in the Paths realm. AOT has always excelled at mystery, and this is another scene that had me super intrigued to learn more. Eren vs Reiner is always exciting to watch, but I have to admit that I wasn't completely satisfied with it at first. The premiere is called Judgment, referring to Reiner's wish of being judged for the terrible atrocities he's committed, so I wanted more internal conflict as he fought Eren. At least we got a beautiful reflection from Gabby in the next episode, who finally realizes that Paradis Island isn't filled with devils, but people no different than them. Falco confessing his feelings for her afterwards was cute, and the symbolism of the open bird cages was a nice touch. The first 2 episodes were really good, but they weren't as exciting as I had imagined, so when the next episode decided to go ballistic, it was the hypest shit. So much went down within 20 minutes that had me glued to my seat, like the frantically moving action, Titan transformations, deaths, and betrayals. The next 2 episodes were just as insane. Memories of the Future is a mind-boggling episode, even more so than the title already suggests. Eren and Zeke taking a literal trip down memory lane for what feels like countless years is sheer insanity, especially considering not even a second is passing on the battlefield of Shiganshina as they're doing this. It's so wild when Grisha notices Eren and Zeke's presence, which will come to affect the timeline dramatically, though I think it course corrects it rather than changes it, if that makes sense. Grisha stops himself from killing the Rice family, which doesn't make sense, as it's a canon event, but that's where Eren comes in. He gives Grisha a speech similar to what Eren Kruger gave him, convincing him to kill the Rice family. Right before this episode came out, I saw the frame of adult Eren speaking to Grisha, so I already inferred that this would be the major twist, but I was worried that it wouldn't make much sense. Same with Grisha seeing Eren and Zeke at other points throughout the episode. However, as I watched the episode and got the explanation that the Attack Titan has the ability to see select memories from future inheritors, and coming to realize that Grisha sees them through Eren's point of view, I found it quite brilliant. Eren kissing Historia's hand in the Season 3 finale is briefly shown, explaining why Eren looked so awestruck in that scene, as he saw an older version of himself convince his father to set things in motion in the past. The ending scene is also brilliant, Grisha's terrific voice actor giving his best performance, freaking out from having killed children against his wishes, asking Eren if this is what he wanted, and apologizing to Zeke, filled with tears and regrets. What a mind-blowingly disturbing, yet touching scene. Grisha is a great example of a character made better even in death, even after death. Memories of the Future was like a certain Game of Thrones episode, but even better, nailing the paradoxical time shenanigans without any mid-fluff. The next episode is also unreal, being titled From You 2000 Years Ago, which finally pays off the first episode's title To You in 2000 Years, 80 episodes later. We get to see the founder Ymir Fritz's backstory, and it's probably the most fucked up shit I've seen in AOT, which says a lot. As a child, her village got raided, she became a slave, and her tongue got removed. She's blamed by everyone around her for letting a pig escape from its pen, which earns her freedom. Sadly, that means being free to run while being hunted down. She's shot by arrows and tries to hide inside a tall tree, where she slips and falls into a pool of water that she nearly drowns in. She's touched by a weird-looking thing that transforms her into the first Titan, and although she now has the power to take revenge on her oppressors, she continues being a slave to the Eldian Empire. A popular theory about Ymir Fritz we're constantly reminded of is that she touched something to gain the power of the Titans, many believing she made a deal with the devil of all Earth. So it's interesting to find out that she didn't even have any say in the matter, further cementing that she's a slave through and through. Her reward for helping the Eldian Empire is disgustingly enough King Fritz's seed, forcing her to bear children so that there will be more Titans. And Ymir even sacrifices herself for King Fritz despite how terrible he is. King Fritz cutting Ymir up and feeding her to their children is so disgusting, but I like the reveal of the daughters' names being that of the Paradis Island walls, Maria, Rose, and Sina. It's also crazy that this and more got foreshadowed in Season 2's ending, Yugure no Tori, before it even happened in the manga. Attack on Titan's foreshadowing and payoffs never cease to amaze me. Ymir still obeys King Fritz's will even in death, even after death, making Titans for him for what feels like eternity. Now that's some toxic loyalty right there. Despite how ridiculous her loyalty is, I think it makes sense, considering Ymir has been treated like a slave her whole life, so she probably doesn't know of any other way to live. Because Eren is the only one to not treat her like a slave, but a person instead, giving her a choice, she finally snaps out of her blind loyalty to the royal bloodline, handing the Founding Titan's power to Eren. This unleashes the much anticipated rumbling, which is such a cathartic moment despite the terrible repercussions. The rumbling has pretty much been foreshadowed since Season 1 ended with a shocking reveal that there are Titans inside the walls. But the idea of the rumbling wasn't planted into my head until Season 3 Episode 20 that day, when Grisha mentions Karl Fritz's fluke of using the Wall Titans to trample the world if they're messed with. At that point I was imagining what an epic scene the rumbling could be, and I wanted it to happen at some point so badly, even if the series would end with it destroying everything and everyone. I wasn't even sure if the rumbling would happen, so when I found out it would, I got extremely hyped, and it's honestly handled so much better than I could have imagined. It's built up tremendously and adds unparalleled stakes, Eren's friends having to stop him, the main character, from destroying the rest of the world. That's just incredible writing that allows for the most juicy drama. It's also insane to consider that the rumbling got activated immediately after Gabby shot Eren's head off in real time, even though it's been 3 episodes. AOT has multiple peak episode trios throughout the show, but honestly, I think episodes 3 to 5 of this part is the best trilogy of the lot, maybe in all of TV even. That's not to say the next episode, Thaw, is underwhelming. That's actually another banger, but it's not as peak as the prior 3. After all, it does introduce the plot point of Connie kidnapping Falco to rescue his mom by feeding him to her, which isn't necessarily bad, but it lacks sufficient build-up to justify its existence. I'd be fine with it if we had seen a few scenes of Connie visiting his mom beforehand that would shape his development, but unfortunately, he's been very underutilized. At least this plot point will give him some much needed growth. Anyhow, I love how the scouts come together to kill the Sikh Titans after there has been so much conflict within the military. Seeing John lead the scouts for a moment is awesome, and so is Keith Shadis joining the fight and saving the recruits who betrayed him. It feels like a classic episode of AOT, even Barricades from the Season 2 soundtrack begins to play, and it's glorious in conjunction with the action. It's still a sad moment, however, as they have to kill their own comrades, including Pixis, who was one of the best characters. I also love Gabby saving Kaya, and Kaya seeing Gabby as Sasha. It's so poetic. Their talk with Niccolo about devils is so moving, especially with the accompanying Thaw music, which might be my favorite from the Season 4 Part 2 soundtrack, alongside Footsteps of Doom. Annie finally comes back after being inactive since the end of Season 1. And while her return seems a bit inconsequential considering the circumstances, it's about time she woke up. Season 4 has improved nearly every character, and Annie is no exception, revealing a compelling backstory and motivation. I like how she references a scene from Lost Girls. It's nice to see some of the OVAs be cemented as canon material. Season 4 Part 2 is exceptional, but I can't deny that its quality gets dragged down a bit by the Pride episode. It's a controversial anime episode and manga chapter, mainly because of the formation of the so-called Cringevengers, as it's an alliance between former enemies, which many find unrealistic, but I myself love that direction. It makes sense as both sides share the common goal of stopping the rumbling from wiping out humanity outside the walls, which is obviously a much stronger drive at this point than the idea of killing each other. Besides, every member of this alliance has a far more nuanced outlook than most, so they're able to view each other as people, even if they hate each other. The reason I find Pride disappointing is because it rushes these developments and wastes some potential for interesting interactions and reactions. I wish I had seen an interaction between Armin and Gabby before reaching Connie and Falco. The plot point of Connie wanting to save his mom by feeding Falco to her was already rushed, and I don't like that there's no scene of Connie apologizing to Falco afterwards, especially since they begin working together from this point onwards. Falco's grief from learning of his brothers and Porco's deaths are regrettably brushed over too. The Annie encounter was pretty funny, but I was annoyed that I didn't get to see how she came to join the team. That might have been my biggest disappointment. The best part of the episode might be when John betrays Flock and is carried away by Peake's cart titan, but the alliance already being formed by that point means we missed out on several interesting meetings and reunions. We didn't get to see the scouts' reactions to Hanji and Levi being alive, along with Levi's critical condition, which is kind of a huge deal when he's the strongest soldier. So is Annie being back, which we only see Reiner's reaction to from the Marleyan side. Compared to other episodes, Pride doesn't have any standout scenes either, so it's definitely the worst episode of Season 4, maybe of the entire show even. The next episode fortunately makes up for it, addressing some of my complaints by having the whole episode be a long discussion between the Alliance members around a campfire. It's a very engaging episode that addresses the characters' terrible actions and contradictions, and suggests that the cycle of violence might be broken if everyone is willing to keep an open mind and talk with one another to understand each other. Of course, achieving this on a global scale would be an impossibly monumental task, but at least it can be done on a micro level as demonstrated by this episode. It's an episode that deals with plenty of big topics, opening with Hanji insisting that genocide is wrong, and that it's not what former scouts like Erwin or Moblet would have wanted. John seeing Marco among them and telling Hanji that he'll always be a scout is such a beautiful moment, accentuated by the delightful Thaw OST. John might have repeated his Season 1 arc of wanting to live in luxury away from danger, but it felt completely natural considering the circumstances. Attack on Titan is probably the most morally grey piece of fiction I've witnessed, where it's tough to pick sides as every character has the ability to do good and bad, including the supposed heroes. This is accentuated even further in the next two episodes, where the scouts have to kill their comrades in order to catch up with the rumbling. Whether stopping the rumbling is the right decision is a hot topic for discussion. If you stop the rumbling, it allows the other nations to destroy Paradis Island along with its inhabitants. But if you allow the rumbling to happen, that means you're complicit in the rest of humanity being wiped out. It's understandable that the Jaegerists don't want the former scenario to happen, especially considering the hell they've been through at the hands of Marley, but their complete disregard for innocent lives is disturbingly ironic, and I admire the Alliance for trying to save the innocent swept up in this conflict. Either way, it's a difficult dilemma, especially if you were in the character's shoes, which is what makes it so compelling. As I said before, Connie has been underutilized, but these two episodes definitely elevate him. He's been complaining that he's constantly being betrayed by his friends, and yet in these episodes, he becomes the traitor, tricking his comrades and killing them. That's just one of many examples of Isayama's brilliant poetic reversals in AOT's story. I'll admit this battle between the Alliance and the Jaegerists would have hit harder if the Jaegerists had more sympathetic characters. Daz and Samuel L. Jackson are highlighted, but they have been absent for most of the show and probably forgotten by the majority of the show's audience, so their deaths is a sad moment because of Connie and Armin's reactions, rather than because those characters specifically died. Flock is the most fleshed out of the lot, and he is really well written, but he hasn't exactly been easy to like. Still, it's an awesome battle that contains some of the best animation of the season, especially when Connie, Flock, and Mikasa get to shine, and Falco's Jaw Titan looks badass. Due to the rushed production, however, the artwork is noticeably inconsistent, and it's a bit ridiculous that no one from the Alliance or Asamabito crew died, considering the number of Jaegerists, but I digress. Retrospective ends on a wonderful send-off to both Theo Magath and Keith Shadis, who exchanged names and sacrificed themselves to prevent more Jaegerists from sailing after the Alliance. No one alive knows Keith was involved, but if you ask me, he was more than a mere bystander. The Dawn of Humanity is an epic title, and a fantastic finale to the part. Half of it is a necessary flashback of the Scouts' first visit to Marley, and their attempt at negotiating peace, which obviously didn't work out. It's nonetheless a very wholesome flashback for the most part, the scouts being excited about cars and ice cream, and partying with an immigrant family. It's perhaps the last bit of levity left in the show. There are also flashbacks of what Eren did before assaulting Marley, meeting with Yelena, telling Flock what to do, asking Zeke if Mikasa actually loves Eren, and even a conversation with Historia. Historia has been so underutilized this season, and I found it odd that she spoke against Eren, but then seemed to go along with this plan. I'm hoping this is another mystery that gets satisfying payoff. Her character is wasted otherwise. The ending scene is incredible, the rumbling taking out the global allied forces and stepping foot on Marley, with the iconic Attack on Titan theme playing in the background. The scale is absolutely wild, especially when Eren's founding Titan is shown. That design is so sick. I love how Eren's last words here mirror his vow to wipe out the Titans near the start of the show, only now he's wiping out everyone else. Another brilliant reversal. I'm glad this episode omitted the opening and ending to give it more runtime. That said, I love them both, and I think they're actually my favorite of the lot. That's especially impressive for the OP, as the first three have been the undisputed champions, but as fantastic as Linked Horizon is, Sim might have outdone them with the rumbling. That heavy metal song slaps extremely hard and captures the tone perfectly. It's entirely sung in English by a Japanese vocalist, yet it doesn't sound like broken English, and I love that the lyrics are completely related to the show. The visuals may not look the most impressive, but they're so fluid and appealing, especially since it includes depictions of the paths and the rumbling. The ED Akuma no Ko is beautiful in its own right, featuring consistently great visuals and Ai Higuchi's angelic voice. Season 4 Part 2 of Attack on Titan was such an insane ride, and despite how underwhelming the Pride episode is, it's outweighed by absolute peak. Here's hoping the show can stick the landing too. Throughout both parts of Season 4, Zeke and Gabby have consistently impressed me, but I think Eren Yeager was my favorite character in this part. I was unsure of where to place him during Part 1, since I didn't really know his style, and while Part 2 doesn't reveal everything about him either, it pulled back the curtain quite a bit. Unlike how he's been portrayed across the first 3 seasons, he's a lot more subtle in Season 4, hiding his intentions behind a facade, but certain actions he takes or even slight expressions he makes are telling of his actual feelings. When Zeke is about to turn the wine drinkers into titans, Eren gestures to Zeke to wait, showing that he does still care about his people. He even says this explicitly in the finale, warning his friends to live long, happy lives, which might not happen if he doesn't carry out the rumbling. The ironic thing is that some of his friends are already dead due to his actions, and they don't even want him to do the rumbling. He's quite the contradictory character, which is actually one of the reasons why I find him so fascinating and realistic. It simultaneously makes me worry that his character might not make much sense in the end. I'll be honest, I was kinda annoyed at Eren for charging into overwhelming odds against Marley in Part 1, as well as in Part 2, where he even gets overwhelmed after saying how stupid Marley's assault is. However, because it eventually got revealed that Eren knew he would continue to live, at least until he'd influenced Grisha, it did actually make sense for him to act so cocky, so I'm glad about that. I guess that's also why I told Zeke that trying to change him is futile, or maybe that's because Eren won't change his ideals. He claims that he's always been fighting for freedom since he was born, and gives the cold line, "Rather than letting someone steal my freedom, I'll steal theirs first." Zeke thinking Eren has been brainwashed by Grisha to carry out his plan, and Eren proving that it's the other way around by manipulating Grisha to carry out his will is a funny meme, but it's so very true. There might be no other character who's as integral to their story as Eren is, literally bending the plot to his will, surprisingly not in a bad way, at least up until now. For my favorite episode, it was between the peak trio, those being Season 4, Episode 19, Two Brothers, Season 4, Episode 20, Memories of the Future, and Season 4, Episode 21, From You 2000 Years Ago. I got spoiled by certain things from each of these episodes, yet despite thinking the latter two would be the craziest, Season 4, Episode 19, Two Brothers surprised me the most, and became my favorite. After all, it's called Two Brothers. It's just called Two Brothers. After the first 2 episodes didn't go too crazy with the action, this was exactly the episode I needed. The stakes are super high from the get-go, as the rumbling can begin if Eren and Zeke come into contact, and the tension keeps ramping up as Eren gets closer to him, while his enemies try their damnedest to stop them. Porco bites Eren's leg, so Eren bashes his face in, but then Eren's Titan gets shot in the head by Magath, and then Jaegerists including Flock approach Magath and Peak. Armin nearly gets shot by Marlians, but is saved by Mikasa. Then Connie throws a thunder spear at them, and the Eldians who drank the wine containing Zeke's spinal fluid join the fray on horseback. It keeps escalating, leaving no dull moments, even when the action pauses. The episode title is put to tremendous use, 2 brothers not only alluding to Eren and Zeke, but also Falco and Colt, along with Porco and Marcel, surprisingly. I'm amazed Isayama managed to fit them into there too, even when Marcel is already dead. Porco learns that Marcel prevented him from becoming a Titan shifter to protect his little brother Porco. Colt is pleading to Zeke to not turn the wine drinkers into Titans to protect his little brother Falco, and Zeke turns the wine drinkers into Titans to protect his little brother Eren. It's such clever writing amidst the chaos, which becomes even more chaotic from this point onward. Falco, Pixis, and Nile turn into Titans, along with plenty of other Eldians, making the battlefield very reminiscent of Season 1. And man, that transformation sequence was done so well with the music and visuals. I like how Zeke tries to turn Falco into a Titan shifter by commanding him to eat Reiner, and it makes sense for Reiner to give up his life for Falco, as he's been wanting to die for a while, and Falco has been a candidate to inherit the Armor Titan. Falco ended up inheriting the Jaw Titan instead by eating Porco, who sacrificed himself to prove that he was more deserving of becoming a warrior than Reiner was. What a Chad way to die. He was wearing the Servicorp's wings of freedom too. How poetic. Colt died as well while Falco was transforming, so this episode truly doesn't hold back, and the craziest moment is still yet to come. Reiner is pissed that Porco had to die, so he gives Eren a deep throat, and Eren performs one of the sickest moves, hardening his Titan to keep Reiner's arm stuck and escaping in his human form. Zeke reveals that he tactically played dead like Peak did in the last episode, and this final stretch where Eren runs towards him while nearly being stopped is the most intense shit, man. The traitor music matches the thrill. It appears he's gonna make it, but then time slows down as Face Gabby returns. Gabby shooting Eren's head off is the craziest visual. The mid-card shows up, and I was dumbfounded to realize this was just half the episode. What an absolute banger. I said I had some of these episodes spoiled to some degree, but I had only seen a drawing of Eren losing his head in paint or something, which I didn't even know was real, so that happening in the show still left me shook, and I had to reflect on that as the Eren and Zeke flashback played. It's kind of a long flashback we've seen before, but it's a deliberate reminder of Eren and Zeke's important conversation, which will pay off in the episode's next half. Besides, we now see the flashback's extended version, where Eren drops the ball that Zeke throws towards him, foreshadowing that Eren isn't on board with Zeke's plan after all. Zeke picks up on this with a shocked expression, which foreshadows that he prepared for Eren's betrayal. The scene afterwards is superbly directed, the camera moving through the action while time is stopped. It turns out Zeke caught Eren's head like a baseball, which is so fitting considering Zeke's baseball obsession, and it being an inverse of the flashback we just saw. I swear, this episode packs so many clever parallels and layers of meaning. The transition into the paths is excellently directed as well, with eerie music reminiscent of the Emmy zones in Metroid Dread, impressively detailed eyes, and otherwise trippy visuals that smoothly transition into one another. Eren and Zeke finally reach the paths, which is such a fascinating dimension, where the founder Ymir Fritz sculpts titans out of the sand for what feels like an eternity. That's such a cool detail that pays off the mystery of how titans are formed out of thin air. Zeke tells Eren to command Ymir to turn all Eldians sterile, and it's so cathartic when Eren betrays Zeke and tells him what a repulsive plan that is. Perhaps the part of the episode that caught me off guard the most was Zeke's Uno reverse card. Everyone assumed Eren would be in control of the founder when him and Zeke touched, and I didn't think of the possibility that it might be the other way around, considering Zeke is of royal blood and is not limited by the vow renouncing war because he isn't the founding titan, Eren is. I should have known better than to underestimate Zeke's cunning. He's always been clever. I like that Zeke still cares about Eren and wants to save him from Grisha's supposed brainwashing. The way the episode ends is so epic. It's a cliffhanger, and yet I was completely satisfied, so I didn't need more for some days. Two Brothers is such an incredibly peak episode. It's monumental, exciting, surprising, dense, amazingly directed, and offers satisfying payoff. Season 3, episode 20 That Day is still my favorite episode, but I think Two Brothers is my number 2, and in my top 5 TV episodes I've seen. Okay, that's enough talk about Attack on Titan. It's been over 4,500 words for fuck's sake. Number 1. Horizon Forbidden West. It was supremely difficult to decide the order of my top 3, as any of them could be my favorite, but I feel like I might prefer Horizon Forbidden West by a tiny bit. Today is actually this game's 2nd anniversary, so happy birthday to one of my favorite games, and sorry for holding the review off for so long. I want to release it in the not too distant future, ideally around the PC version's release in about a month from now, but I might have to dedicate a video to my channel's 2nd anniversary before that. I guess it's also Arcadon's 8th anniversary, but February 29th only appears once every 4 years. Hopefully my review of Horizon Forbidden West won't take that long to complete. After about 24,000 words, I finally explained my top 15 favorite media texts of 2022. I'd say they deserve being talked about for so long, as I experienced so many good media texts during that year, including some of my absolute favorites, particularly Everything Everywhere All at Once, Attack on Titan Season 4 Part 2, and Horizon Forbidden West. I'm pleasantly surprised that my top 3 are of different mediums. I really didn't expect to include so many movies, and for video games to be the least represented. Now that's unusual on my channel. That might stem from the fact that I spent a while replaying some of the 2021 games for their dedicated countdown video, in addition to God of War Ragnarok, Mass Effect 3, and especially Horizon Forbidden West being huge time sinks. Also because I was occupied with so many movies and TV shows, not to mention school. That doesn't take away from how fantastic 2022 was for media in general, and there is plenty of other good stuff I didn't include. I think I'll continue with this style of tackling countdown videos, though I may release the entries separately to make my channel more active. I only released a total of 3 videos last year, and they were all related to Ratchet & Clank, 2 of which should have released the year before. 2023 is already over, so I have a good idea of what its best media texts are, and it's been better than expected. Is it as good as 2022? You'll have to find out when I get to it. Also, stay tuned for the Horizon Forbidden West review, which I'll hopefully release in the not too distant future for once, though I can't promise anything. We've seen how that goes. With that, this ridiculously long video can finally come to an end. I'm Arcadon, and hopefully, you'll see me next time!